Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku's quirk was a game changer part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 3, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. He's a child. Midoriya, listen to me. He growled as he grabbed the child's hands, trying to get them to lay flat against his chest. The rapid breathing coming from the greenette had the teacher worried. He knew what hyperventilating looked like and he knew what a panic attack could do to an individual if they weren't curbed. Except he wasn't sure he was going to be able to curb this attack. The kid was too far into it and wasn't even staring at the teacher anymore. His eyes had dulled and his breathing was so rapid and shallow he was surprised his lips hadn't turned completely blue yet. You have to try and follow my breathing, come on kid. He growled as he forced a hand open and flat against his chest. The other one he kept a hold of and rubbed calming circles into it. It didn't seem to be doing much. Come on, 1, 2, 3. He counted each deep breath he took, but the kid couldn't seem capable. He needed to do something else, something to knock him out of the thoughts that were causing the panic. It would be easier if he knew why. But he didn't, so he had to do something else. Something that might make the kid shock himself out of this attack and quickly. The kid was smart, scarily so, which might be something he could use to help the kid out. Alright, play towards the kid's intellect and hit upon something he enjoyed. Midoriya, tell me what you know about my quirk, he ordered, tapping on the kid's hands lightly. He sighed when he saw a spark in those dull eyes, not quite brightening all the way, but it was something to go off of. Tell me kid. That's an order. Make it good and I might even give you extra credit for it. The teen gasped as he focused on his teacher, staring at him blankly for a moment, causing Aizawa to wonder if he was going to respond to this or not. Then, the kid opened its mouth, speaking slowly and stuttering every other word. But he spoke about Aizawa's quirk. He spoke of the pros and cons of the quirk, the techniques that his teacher used to cover for the cons, and then new ideas to help improve his abilities. One being either tying his hair up or chopping it off so that he no longer had a tail. He'd never cut his hair, but Aizawa would most likely tie his hair up from now on. Something he should have thought about when Shigaraki had figured it out during the USJ and had used it against him. He did not think his goggles were ugly nor stupid. The kid had no clue what he was talking about. They must have sat there in front of the dorms for an hour, maybe 2, just allowing Midoriya to talk about his quirk, trying to calm him down. Then there was a moment when Midoriya stopped talking and they fell quiet. Aizawa went to speak but then had to hurriedly wrap his arms around the boy as he fell forward, right into his chest. He quickly moved the kid enough to look at his face and realized that he had fallen asleep. He sighed as he realized the kid would be okay before looking down at the blood that was splattered across his shirt and face. How he was able to walk anywhere like that without being stopped was beyond him. They needed to go to the infirmary. Recovery girl was normally on call during the week, so it wouldn't be hard to get her to meet him there. He sent a quick text to her before scooping the kid in his arms and walking across campus, mentally groaning at the weight of the kid. For being such a small green bean, he was packing some major weight to him. The kid's face was impossibly pale, and the area around his eyes were swollen and red. Whatever had forced Midoriya into this state must have been bad, especially since Nighteye was throwing a fit at getting the kid back to his agency. Too bad for him. He'd have to wait until he was sure the kid was okay. He had failed many times before where this kid was concerned, so he wasn't going to make the similar mistakes from the past. Nighteye would have to wait until he was sure Midoriya was okay, both physically and mentally. He wasted little time in opening the door to the infirmary and settling the kid on the cot, recovery girl already moving to look the teen over. What happened this time? She questioned with exasperation, obviously very tired of having to look this specific teen over all the time. No clue. I got a call from Nighteye, asking where Midoriya was when the kid should have been with him at his agency. Kid showed up about 2 hours ago and fell into a panic attack. Took forever to get him out of it. He explained as quickly as possible. That must be why he's unconscious then. Panic attacks drain the individual greatly, especially if they are forced to go through them for long periods of time. She hummed as she moved his arms joints, eyes narrowing in thought before moving towards his fingers. I need to do some x-rays, she decided, shooing the older man out. I'll call you once I've figured out what's going on. With that, Aizawa was unceremoniously kicked out and left to wait. HC as he waited to hear about the problem child. He texted Nezu, called Midoriya and Co., and then sent a text to Nighteye and All Might. He made sure those who needed to know were in the know, and he was now also waiting for Mrs. Midoriya to show up so that she could see her son and maybe help soothe him if he was to go into another panic attack. Nezu had replied that he'd be down to hear about what had happened and hopefully help reassure the worried mother. All Might was already standing outside the door, twisting his fingers as he waited to be allowed in to see the boy. I'm going down to meet with Mrs. Midoriya and bring her up. Text me if recovery girl lets you in. Aizawa stated as he walked off down the hall, ignoring the grunted reply from the once number 1. The walk down to the gates was calm and silent, nothing out of place for the late hour of the night. Almost 1 in the morning at this point. He sighed as he leaned against the gate's wall, waiting for the mother. She should be arriving anytime now, and he didn't want to waste any time checking her in at the front gate, so he had already made sure it was done so they could get moving as soon as she got here. I thought I told you to bring him straight to my agency. A voice shattered the silence of the night, and Aizawa's eyes narrowed as they instantly landed on the immaculate form of Sir Nighteye. The information he has is vital for an ongoing investigation. The student is currently in the care of Recovery Girl, as he returned covered in blood, shock, and proceeded to go into a panic attack. Aizawa informed coldly, my top priority, as Midoriya's homeroom teacher, a teacher in general, is to make sure he is safe and healthy. I will not just drag him to an agency just because another hero demanded me to, especially when it could affect his health. Nighteye scowled at him as he waved Tagada back onto the school campus, completely late for curfew but excused as he was at his internship. Midoriya is an intern of mine, meaning I can pull him out when I feel the need for his assistance. He held a paper out towards the teacher imperiously. Said teacher just stared at him blandly as he looked at the filled-out paperwork and the stamped seal. Except I have yet to approve this internship. He pointed to the spots that were left for him to sign. Empty. So until I have confirmed that Midoriya wishes to work with you and have filled out my part of the paperwork, you have no right to be pulling him out, let alone demanding of his presence. Nighteye went to say something else but was stopped when a warbling voice broke them up. Excuse me, Mr. Aizawa. He turned and saw the portly green-haired woman with tears streaming down her face already. By my so on. Right, come with me, Mrs. Midoriya, I'll take you right up, he said just as he felt his phone vibrate. He pulled it out and looked it over, sighing as he read the text from the blonde saying Recovery Girl was waiting for them. Good timing. Recovery Girl has finished her examination and is ready to tell us what's wrong with Midoriya. He led the woman up towards the school, ignoring the second presence that was unwanted at this point of time. The man was making himself more of a nuisance than anything else. He'd survive it, but if he upset his student or his mother, then he would boot him. He wasn't taking any shit anymore, let alone from a hero who was self-entitled. Good, we're all here. Recovery Girl hummed as she looked at everyone gathered. Her gaze narrowed at the unexpected inclusion of Nighteye, but let it go as she looked towards the mother. If you don't mind the others being here, I'd like to go over what I've found. 𝐭 looked around her, taking in the form of the slightly pale All Might with blood dribbling from the corner of his mouth, the stoic principal standing on the end of her son's bed, the ruffled-looking homeroom teacher, an impeccable form of the unexpected hero. I do want him mind. Just tell me what's happened to my son. The elderly hero nodded at that as she looked down at the clipboard with all the information. When Midoriya was first brought in, he had blood splattered on his face and shirt, some of it was even on his pants. I changed him into a gown and the clothes have been bagged for later. She pointed over to where said bag was before continuing. When I began to examine your son, there was something I noticed right away. She walked over to the bed and pulled out the arm that had massive amounts of scarring on it from previous fights in the sports festival. She held it aloft in her own hands as she allowed the others in the room to stare at it. Surprisingly, it was All Might that was able to answer what they were looking for, though a splatter of blood came before the surprised answer. His fingers, they're not crooked. That caught all of their attention, excluding Nighteye, who just raised a brow at that. That's right. She allowed the mother to take the hand so that she could look at it herself. The scarring is still there and even some new scars is as well. She pointed out said scars that ran up his arms like he had been sliced repeatedly over and over again. But, what does that mean? 𝐭 murmured as she handled her son's hand, taking in the straightened fingers and the newer scars that laid on her son's forearms. It was almost like someone took a scalpel and just put cuts there for the style of it. I don't know, but it's like his arms. She pulled the over down to reveal that the boy's other arm had similar marks on it with an IV in the back of his hand, have been torn asunder and put back together. Like his arms have been rebuilt but had to be ripped apart to do so. She covered the boy up, allowing the mother to keep a hold of the one hand though. It seemed to help relax her and the lines on Midoriya's face loosened up even more. Put back together, you say? Nedzu said as he walked over to look at the hand himself. He had seen it during his lessons with the boy, remembering the bent and crooked fingers. Does that mean he no longer suffers from the damage of before? That's right. His bones are no longer under the threat of being completely useless if he were to break them again. She scowled towards All Might at this. That doesn't mean he should break them when he trains, but that threat is no longer there. The bones themselves are completely back to before they were shattered during the sports festival, if a little tender. But how is that possible? All Might questioned as he too looked closely at the hand the boy was holding. As far as I know, there isn't a quirk that can take apart and put things back together like that. From the looks of it as well, it seems to leave its own mark on the person it is used on. That would be because the person who has this quirk is a villain that has stayed low on the radar for some time. Nighteye spoke up as he pushed his glasses onto his nose. This is the investigation that you requested my help with then, Aizawa said with a raised brow. At Yakuza boss brat. Correct. The man looked at the group in front of him, eyes landing on the mother in front of him. I do believe that we should have this conversation away from the civilian as it contains sensitive information, said mother, whipped around to glare at the hero. My son is currently laying in a bed, having been ripped apart and put together because of an investigation that concerns you. I suggest you backtrack what you just said or I will sue you for endangering my son. The man wheeled back as he stared down at the once stuttering woman, now fierce and full of fire that actually intimidated him. Mrs. Midoriya is actually a lawyer and I can assure you, any information said here will be kept quiet. She knows the importance of keeping your hand hidden until it is needed. Nezu spoke as he nodded towards the woman. Nighteye narrowed his eyes as he took in the group in front of him before sighing and nodding. The Yakuza boss, a dying breed in today's society, that Aizawa mentioned is indeed the one that did this. I caught a glimpse of him and the boy walking together down an alleyway before it changed. What do you mean you saw him walking with this Yakuza boss? Inko spoke with her eyes still narrowed on the hero. It was obvious that she had a dislike for the man already, and that was astonishing as the only other one she truly did not like was Endeavor. My quirk, Foresight, allows me to see into a person's future for 1 hour a day. The further in the future I go, the grainer the picture gets, but the closer to the present it is, the clearer it is. He raised a brow at the woman, wondering if she was keeping up. He was shocked to see her eyes had turned calculating and narrowed even more. It was more than obvious she was intelligent and he was underestimating her. So, I'm assuming you used your quirk on young Midoriya then. Yagi spoke up as he stared in confusion at the man. The once sidekick had stopped using his quirk for the most part after witnessing Yaga's death forever ago, so why would he use it on a teen seemingly randomly? Nighteye nodded as he pushed his glasses up. Normally, what I see is set in stone, bound to happen and unchangeable. I'd never once remember seeing it change in all the years I've used it. His gaze settled on the still unconscious teenager, until I used it on him. It was all following the normal paths, but then he changed them, completely disrupting the film and rearranging the movie. He huffed as he remembered what the film changed again and again before settling for a moment on a path. One that still flickered and changed, as if it was set in stone. 𝐻𝐵, it seems Mr. Midoriya is indeed full of surprises. Nezu rocked on his heels for a moment before waving his hand in a go-on motion. Well, the path I saw was him holding a child and following Overhaul, the Yakuza boss, into the alley. That sight had terrified him for longer than it should have done so, but in the end, he had gathered his wits together and formed a plan. He had watched the film for as long as he possibly could before it had worn off, and then he had called Aizawa to bring the boy back to him. From there, I continued to watch the film to try and decipher what I could, but it kept flickering at certain parts, as if they weren't sure which way they would go. So you have no clue what happened during his time with the villain? Aizawa questioned with a raised brow. No, I don't. I don't understand why, but it seems that the only one who has that information is that boy there. He has a name. Inko spat as she glared at the man. Not boy or him. His name is Midoriya Izuku, and if you can't use it, then leave. That made the hero huff and shake his head before turning back to the underground hero. That was why I needed you to bring him back to the agency. He has information vital to the investigation, and since I have taken him on as my intern, you were obligated to do so. And as I've already said before, Aizawa pulled the paperwork out as he pointed at the area that was awaiting for his approval of said work study, that if I don't sign here, then the work study is not approved and I was under no such obligation. It's also apparent that it will not be a viable option for Midoriya either, as you have shown no care for his well-being at all during this time. With that said, he ripped the paperwork right down the middle. Nighteye stared for a long minute before scowling. He is working towards a hero career. What do you think you are doing by holding him back in a work study? My job is to make sure my students thrive wherever they go, and that means making sure their work studies are places that will help them grow. Aizawa waved over towards the unconscious teen. Obviously, he would not grow under you. You would just continue to pummel him down into the ground. I don't know why you would, as you've helped Mirio grow into a great young hero that will do great things when he graduates. This wouldn't happen to do with me, would it, Mirai? Yagi spoke up, eyes narrowed and glowing brightly. Aizawa's eyes narrowed as did Inko's. But Mirai just looked away from the once #1 hero. Why would it have anything to do with you? Inko was the one to ask. Because I took an interest in young Midoriya before he entered high school, something that Mirai had been trying to get me to do with a student he had been mentoring himself. He couldn't really explain one for all to them. It wasn't his secret to tell anymore, which reminded him to tell young Midoriya that. He would still advise against telling people as a precaution, but really, he couldn't stop him if he wanted to explain it to some people. Aizawa, for example. I knew you favored Midoriya, but this explains it a little better, Aizawa said as he ran a hand through his hair. It explained a lot about some of the things that All Might did concerning the student, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. Midoriya was still learning and growing. It would be fine, especially with someone like All Might at his back. Haha, I didn't think it was that obvious. He chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head. Either way, why should that affect the way he treats my son? 𝐭 interjected, getting them back on track. She wanted to know why this was happening. Why this hero was trying to force her baby, who just went through something traumatic, into going somewhere instead of a hospital or doctor. I wouldn't know for sure, but that would be something Mirai would have to explain. Yagi waved his hand towards the other. Though I have my suspicions about exactly what it is, which means he has no right nor reason to be sticking his nose into it. He shot at the man. I have every right sticking my nose into it. He sent a light glare at the skeleton of a man he once followed. I was your sidekick and I worried for you. I wanted to make sure you had the best in all choices you had left. All Might sighed as he motioned towards the door. Let's go talk in private for a moment. I have a feeling this is a lot more than just young Midoriya. With that he led the other out, leaving the other three adults with the teen. What do you think that was about? Aizawa questioned as he looked towards Nezu. Who knows, but hopefully this will not affect Midoriya and his growth. He sipped at a cup of tea that had come from nowhere. Recovery Girl was sipping at her own and 𝐭 was holding one in her two hands, watching her son closely. Aizawa could only sigh as a cup appeared in his own hand and hoped that this would not affect the sleeping child as well. After all, the problem child had gone through and suffered enough as is, but hopefully this time Aizawa and the other teachers would not fail him. I do not see how you could choose such a lackluster child as a successor, was the first thing out of Night-Eye's mouth as they came to an empty lounge, one of many scattered around the school. All Might could only stare at the man in front of him, his once-upon-time sidekick that had helped him with many missions and rescues. Now he wondered where the other had strayed so far from what he once had been, so energetic and ready to give any hero a chance to work with them, to this antagonistic man that had no real hope for newer heroes that didn't have a certain aura to them. It was obvious he respected Aizawa but did not like the man. He held no respect for Midoriya at all. I don't know what you mean by lackluster, he began as he thought about Midoriya with a soft smile. He's anything but that. Intelligent, clever, strong, kind, and compassionate. He has a drive to be a hero that will go even further than I ever did. He raised his head so he could look into Mirai's eyes. I don't see how that is lackluster. He has no real control over the quirk given to him. He is reckless and wastes time with mediocre plans. And he does not exude the aura that is needed for a symbol of peace. Mirai shot right back. He does not deserve to inherit one for all nor your title. I am assuming that young Mirio is the one you would have chosen then. He questioned with a raised brow at the man. Yes, he has all the qualities needed to be the next symbol of peace and #1 hero. He is very much like you in many ways and could hold his own with the quirk given to him, especially if he was forced to face a villain like All-For-One. He pushed his glasses up with a smile as he thought about his student. He will be a superb successor for you. I agree that he will make a fine young hero, maybe even one of the best. The blonde leveled a glare at the man. But I would not force a quirk on someone who does not want it. Brows furrowed. Night-Eye was caught off guard. What do you mean by that? I am anything but stupid, Mirai. I know you told young Mirio about the quirk I once held. There had to be a reason for why he avoided me so avidly at the start of the year. He scowled at that reminder, knowing that his once sidekick would dare tell a secret he had no right to. Do you think I cannot tell when one is afraid of me or fears for something? Do you really think I would force a quirk on an individual that did not want it? Mirai kept his head turned away at this point, understanding that he had done something most wrong, even though he felt it was right. Even if it was wrong, he would stand by his choice and decision on the two students that had come to him for work study. Mirio was going to be the best hero and would be made even better with one for all. Midoriya would fail and most likely die and take the quirk with him to the afterlife. I stand by what I believe All Might. Midoriya does not deserve one for all like Mirio does. He will not survive in the world and he will not bring peace like you did. No, you're wrong. The blonde shook his head as he thought about all the interactions he's had with his successor and all that he had done. Midoriya has much to offer to the world, in many different ways. I don't expect him to be exactly like me when he becomes a hero. And boy had that taken some time to get through his head. Young Midoriya hadn't taken to the quirk like him, something that had startled the man, as he had been quirkless when he had received it and assumed Midoriya would end in the same situation as him. That had been the start, but it would take the final exam to realize that Midoriya would never be like him. He would be much more. He's going to be a hero with a powerful quirk, Mirai stated seriously. He'll destroy all that's around him with the recklessness and abandon that he has. He's a child in school, learning about an ability he hasn't even had for a year. He's learning and growing and getting stronger every day. Yagi spat back as he straightened his back and pushed his shoulders back. He was still much taller than Night-Eye, even in his small form, and so he made sure he put all of his last remaining power to force the man to keep his eyes on him. He's going to be far better than any hero out there one day, as long as he has the guidance of those willing to help him, which he does with those who are here at UA. He gave a sigh as he shook his head. I had hoped he would have guidance in you as well. The only person I had ever held at my side as a sidekick and companion against villains. It is apparent I was wrong, and you are the last person that young Midoriya needs. I have accepted him as an intern at my agency. He has a place that he can have if he so chooses. Nighteye continued with the argument that he should have known would not work. He does not. Aizawa did not approve it and in fact, rejected the idea entirely when he ripped that form up. He is not an intern under you, and I will make sure that he will never be an intern under you. You will be lucky if we continue to allow young Mirio to continue working under you with such blatant disregard to another student, he informed as his shoulders slumped once more and he felt blood dribble into his mouth. He took out a handkerchief that was already splattered in blood and spat in it. You cannot pull a student that was already approved for a work study out of one. It has never been done before. Nighteye didn't think that would happen since Mirio had flourished under his teachings and guidance. There had been no incidents that proved otherwise. It hasn't been done because it was not needed before, Zetsu stated from beside All Might, startling the two. It can easily be done though, especially if we fear a student will be put into a situation that is dangerous to them. Whether it be physical or mental, it does not matter. We care for our students' well-beings. I see. That made the future-seeing hero pause, unsure of what to say to that. All Might coughed to clear his throat before continuing. Either way, it doesn't matter. You have greatly overstepped boundaries that have no concern for you and you had no right to cross. You owe that boy an apology, as well as young Mirio. You have no right dictating their lives as you have tried. With that he turned and walked out, leaving a blank-faced Mirio behind. You know, as a principal of a high school, I have watched children continuously evolve and change. Zetsu said as he took a sip of his tea. They are always growing and finding new ways to get into trouble or to cause it. That made him chuckle as he remembered some of the pranks over the years and some of the disasters his students had gotten into. A lecture from UA. As principal, how honorable, Nighteye stated with as much dryness as possible. He had heard about the lectures from the principal and how long they could be, causing many heroes wanting to run away before they could get trapped in one. Now it was Nightaye's turn to try and run so he would not have to suffer under such a lecture. Only, when he went to open the door, it would not do so. It was locked. Do not think for a moment that you will escape after causing harm to not only one of my students, but two. Those beady eyes glinted and Nighteye realized he wasn't escaping unless he destroyed the door and any doors beyond. So I suggest you get comfortable because you are not leaving until I am finished with you. But that, Nighteye could only stand and receive the most verbally humiliating dress down in history. HC. He stared in horror as the child was strapped to a chair and tubes were forced into her little body. He had followed the man to a car where they had loaded up, his grip on the girl tightening as he felt her shivering begin to worsen into trembles. Wherever they were going, it wasn't a good place and it wasn't any fun. So when they got to a large Japanese-style estate and he was led to a hidden doorway, a specific pattern needed for it to open, he could do nothing but follow. He continued to hold the girl tightly and began to rub her back as it was apparent that wherever they were going was terrifying her more and more. The girl was forced from his arms as they entered a room with a metal chair with machines all around it, and that was where she was strapped in. What are you doing to her? He cried as he tried to move forward, reaching to pull her off the chair and away from this place. Arms wrapped around his body, slamming his hands to his sides and his feet left the ground. He kicked out wildly as he watched the child turn whiter and whiter as her blood was drained from her. Take him and get an x-ray of his foot done. If he doesn't have the double joint in his pinky toe, kill him, the man ordered. Izuku fought harder as he tried to escape, trying to get back to Eri as he watched her list to the side. No, Eri, let her go, let her go. He cried even as he was taken from the room, struggling to get away. He couldn't use his quirk. That would give him away, and despite the strength, he didn't think he'd be able to get away unscathed, let alone alive. So he just fought like he was quirkless. He fought as hard as he could until he was brought into a room with a metallic table and a familiar machine positioned over it. Hey, give me a hand here, Mimic, the person holding him asked. He could only see a white jacket with white gloves before a small figure, almost cartoonish in their size, appeared in the new room he had been dragged to. Why don't you just freeze him, Chrono? The figure questioned as he grew in size until he was well over 6 feet tall, figure still hidden by a black cloak and a white bird plague mask. The man quickly grabbed hold of the teen by the neck in one hand before slamming a fist into the side of his head, stunning him. Izuku went limp as he struggled to get his bearings. Everything was spinning and he knew he was being laid out on the table. Because, if I slowed him down, he'd still move, even as minuscule as it would be. The picture would be ineffective. I see, the now tiny figure stated as he hopped up onto the table next to Izuku's head, watching as the machine was aimed at his feet. Well, get it done. Boss wants it done quickly. Of course, I won't leave the boss to wait too long, the other stated, and Izuku could only lay there as the x-ray was taken. He wasn't quite sure what happened after that, only that he was dragged from there and back to a room with a couch and a throne-like black chair across from it. He was set on the couch and left there, alone. He allowed himself to fall over onto his side and grip his hair, his head pounding. That big guy packed a punch and he was almost convinced he had a minor concussion now. He groaned in agony as he laid on the couch. It seemed forever before the door opened again and footsteps were echoing around him, but he didn't move. He'd wait and see. After all, he was supposed to be quirkless and weak. No training as a hero at all. It seems you are indeed quirkless, the man stated as he took the chair across and crossed his legs, several black plastic films in his hand as he held them up to the light. You have the double joint, but it seems that you've taken some damage from society. Izuku looked up with squinted eyes, staring at where he could see pictures of his arms and legs and his feet. They showed not only the double joint, but the damage he had done over the last year with his inherited quirk. Izuku hummed as he stared at the damage he had done. He had seen X-rays before, Recovery Girl having yelled at him and using them to make a point, but he had never really paid much attention. He could see the deterioration where his joints meet and the see-through portions on the edges of the radius and ulna. He had really done himself a disservice there. He could tell, for you to be perfect, I should fix you. That had Izuku shooting up in his seat, groaning as the world spun at the sudden movement. Yes, I'll go ahead and fix that. Izuku couldn't move fast enough to dodge the ungloved hand heading straight for his face. All he knew was pain. He bolted up from where he was laying, mouth wide open as he screamed, Midoriya, Izuku. He felt a hand on his shoulder but he flinched back violently. He shoved his hands out in front of him, trying to keep the hands from touching him, keep the pain away from him. He ached all over but it was like he had worked out, not having been ripped apart again and again and again. He couldn't do that again. His heart was beating so fast and rapidly, his breathing was coming in and out too fast, and he knew he was heading towards a panic attack. He didn't think he was going to be able to avoid it. Not after that dream, that memory. It was just too much. It seemed forever before a soft sound caught his attention. It was soft and calm, breathing a sense of familiarity into him. It was humming, a lullaby that he knew so very well and one that had led him home more than once before. His mother was humming their lullaby to bring him back, so he followed it. He blinked as he brought his suddenly fuzzy and tired head up, meeting with teary-eyed jade eyes. Mom, he managed to clumsily sign as he looked at her. She smiled at him as she signed with her actual words. Yes, Izuku, it's Mom. With that, Izuku allowed himself to fall forward into her waiting arms and cried. Not a single sound escaped him. She's just a little girl. She remembered warm hands and voices like the wind. She didn't fully comprehend what all the touches and voices were saying, but she knew that they were safe and warm. That's all she knew about those two voices that surrounded her for what seemed like an eternity. Then she remembers burning and a scream, and then she was cold, on the floor, where she ended up, swaddled in clothes that were much too big for her. Then the other warmth, the other voice of wind, disappeared and left her with a coldness and voices that were like the rocks in the wind's garden. She learned later that the warm touches and wind-like voices were that of her parents, that her curse had killed her daddy. Now she was with the man that had hurt the old man that had taken her in after her mommy had left her. That was 1 year ago. She was 2, back when she was delivered to her grandfather's care, and he did the best for her as he could. He had a room set up for her that was painted pink with little flowers and a bed that had white sheets and comforters. Plenty of toys were strewn around to play with and crayons and paper to draw with. It was okay for a little while. It wasn't what had been before. The warmth and the wind voices were no longer there to whisper things in her ears that she loved. The warm hugs and kisses to her cheeks and forehead and all over. It was feelings she missed greatly now that she knew the cold toughness of a mountain that held a voice as strong as a roaring fire. It was a completely different type of feeling, one she was still unsure of but would allow to happen. There were a few people that came in and out to speak with her, words that flew over her head when she was so young already. A little 3-year-old girl that knew nothing of the lives of adults and their mannerisms, so she knew nothing of quirks or dysfunct now, or other big words that made no sense. Some asked if she knew what had happened to her daddy, why he wasn't there with her anymore. She had told them that she didn't know. He had been there 1 second and then the next he wasn't, and she was on the cold floor. There were times when that burning pain would rack her body and leave her hot and trembling afterwards. She never really knew what happened during those times, let alone times afterwards for long black periods. She'd wake up with a wet cloth on her forehead and Grandpa sitting at her bedside, nodding off. He was so kind to her. He didn't understand why Mommy had left her with Grandpa and disappeared, but she was really liking him the more time she spent with him. He was strong like a mountain, holding his ground even against the strongest of winds. His voice was cold but not bitterly so, holding a soft warmth that gave her hope that it would be okay. It went like that for a year, and when she was 4, it all changed. Grandpa disappeared. Overhaul appeared. His entire being was like the darkness that was deep in her closet at night, where no light could get to it, and where the monsters hid. His voice was nothing but achingly cold, like the ice cubes that she would hold in her hands during the hot summers. It bit into her skin and deep into her chest, making it ache with fear and terror. It made her shake and tremble and know that nothing good could come from knowing him and all that he would bring with him. She was soon being strapped to a chair, little sticks with cotton shoved into her mouth, and they would take a knife and scrape skin off of her arms and legs. It stung and itched. The cotton made her mouth dry, and sometimes they'd scrape so hard that blood would well up. The first time that Overhaul ever tore her apart was when they had gotten frustrated with her. She had been picked up from the room in the basement, nothing like the room up top in the building she had lived with her grandpa. It was cold and littered with unopened boxes of toys she refused to touch. Her bed was bare except for a blanket that barely kept her warm in between visits from Overhaul. Her walls were a depressing sterile white, and no real color except from the toys was there. She had been pulled from bed that day, tired and cranky from being woken early after a harsh day of testing once more. She just wanted to sleep in her bed and be left alone. She didn't want to be poked and prodded again and again and again until she bled and was red all over, mouth cracking from being so dry. So she squirmed in the person's hold and began to dig her heels in, screaming to be let go so she could go back to sleep. The man had turned and slapped her on the cheek. Eri only remembers the burning pain in her blood as she screamed in complete agony. It stopped as suddenly as it started. The pang of aches in her joints and limbs came to her after she became aware once more. That was the first time Overhaul had remade her, when she lost control of her quirk. The second person she had made disappear. 𝐔𝐬𝐽 time passed. She was remade over and over again as they had moved on to taking the red stuff in her body. They took pieces of skin as well and had even cut her open a few times to take stuff from inside of her. It was all painful and it hurt all around. But because of the pain and her continued existence underneath the facility, Eri couldn't tell you what day it was, even if she had the chance to go outside and see the sun and feel the wind on her skin. She was completely isolated within the facility, only allowed into the upper part with a guard that made sure that none of the men there decided to hurt her. Mostly 𝗏𝗏 would watch her, his quirk excellent to stop anyone in their tracks, even Eri herself. He would keep her within the building as she was not allowed outside, where someone could see her or where she could be contaminated. So it was strange that this time it was different. 𝗏𝗏 wasn't the one to watch her this time. It was some nameless person she hadn't met before, someone who didn't know about the struggles that the little girl would occasionally make when she tried to get away from the pain and terror of her prison, away from Overhaul. It was easy to sneak away from him in the dining hall of the facility. There were a lot of the other bigger men there, full of muscles and dark glasses, and some wore dark masks. Most wore suit jackets or long-sleeved shirts that were buttoned up the front, with pieces of cloths tied around their necks. They all looked scary and were much bigger than Eri. That, though, was something that Eri could use. Because they were so much bigger than her, Eri went unnoticed fast. This was the first escape attempt she made. She got out to the street in front of the facility but was caught when she ran into 𝗏𝗏 and Overhaul coming around the corner of the street. The person who was supposed to be watching her was remade into a puddle. 𝗧𝗏𝗪 that wasn't the last time she would attempt to escape. She just wanted the pain to stop. She didn't want to keep hurting. She didn't want to keep screaming and crying out in pain as they ripped her apart or drained her of the red stuff or cut her open to take things from inside. She just hurt and she wanted it to stop. So she would run whenever she had the chance. They all failed in one way or another. Either she got lost in the halls deep underground or someone would catch her on the streets above. She was always caught and dragged back to be drained once more and remade again. The pain was never ending and her escape attempts got further apart because of it. Until one day, she got farther than ever before. Her feet were bleeding and her lungs burned. She could hear Overhaul somewhere behind her, but she wasn't going to stop. She was going to keep running until she got away. She didn't want to go back to Overhaul. She was so focused on getting away that she wasn't paying attention to what was in front of her until she ran into a person, both of them falling to the ground. She clung to his shirt and didn't let go, even as his hands ran over her back. "Oh, are you okay? You took a bit of a tumble there." The voice was like the wind, tinkling in her ears, and the hands against her back was so warm, she felt safe and secure. "Hey, are you okay? What's wrong?" She felt him shift and soon she had an arm around her back and underneath her butt. She clung tighter to him, feeding off of the warmth that he was giving off. He was so warm and she felt that she would be safe with him, that it would be okay if she could just keep a hold of him. Hope flared in her chest. "Please," she whispered as she tried to convey how much she desperately didn't want to go back to the man that was swiftly approaching. They hadn't moved and she knew that Overhaul would be appearing soon. "It's okay, I'll help you." He shifted once more, standing up so that he could begin to move, hopefully away from the man coming for her. "Let's see about getting some help. Maybe we can find your parents." She wanted to relax so badly at that, but she completely froze as the sound of that voice. There won't be a need for that. He had arrived and there was no escaping him. He would most likely remake this nice person into a puddle, like many of her caretakers in the past. "Come now, Eri, don't bother the teen. He looks like he was just heading somewhere." She felt like a leaf in the wind, trembling as she felt the anger and rage that Overhaul was emitting at this point. She was going to be remade as a punishment, she was sure of it. No worries. The boy spoke as his body seemed to curl around her, trying to hide her from the golden eyes glaring at her. I was just heading back home when we ran into each other. She could feel his heart hammer against his chest, much like her own. She wasn't sure why he was talking, but it was obvious that he didn't want to let her go, so she held on to him tighter. Who are you? Overhaul was a bad man. That was who he was, always hurting Eri and remaking her. Me, I'm Eri's father, of course. A lie he had been telling just to make other people leave her alone in his care when she managed to run away, even for a little bit. If you'll just hand her over, we'll be on our way. She could feel the teen tighten his hold on her, and the swallowing motion told her how scared he was. She did that too when she was faced with Overhaul's stare. It was scary for her, so she wondered if it was scary for the other as well. Either way, she didn't want to go back, so her hands pulled at his shirt to make sure he was paying attention to her. Please, help me. His entire body seemed to lean over the top of her, shielding her from Overhaul's gaze, though she still felt the rage from him. I'm sorry, but I don't think she's really going to let go. Rage enveloped the two and she was shivering heavier than before. Her entire body was shaking with how terrified she was at the moment. That's fine, but Eri, we need to go. We don't want to waste this young man's time. After all, I'm sure he has more important things to worry about. The arm around her back shifted and tightened as the boy seemed to shrink on himself suddenly. No, I don't, not really. I don't really have anything going on. Not like anyone would miss me. He sounded so sad suddenly, a lot like how Eri got when she was caught after her escape attempt. His body seemed to almost slump for a moment in that sadness. Oh, and why's that? The rage was suddenly gone, instead replaced with a tone more curious. That made her shake even more, as that was the tone that led to her being sliced open and parts of her being pulled out. Because I'm quirkless. The boy's entire body stiffened, as if realizing what he had just said, though Eri wasn't sure she understood. Why was that a bad thing? Was it a terrible secret he wasn't supposed to let people know, much like Eri wasn't supposed to be spotted and instead stay hidden? If that's so, then maybe we can help each other. Come with me and we can talk about it. She looks up at the boy holding her, the warmth in his arms so comforting, but the terror that was Overhaul when he was curious was even more so powerful. It made her entire shake and her teeth chatter in the fear of that ever-blinding curiosity that led to her being cut open and drained on an almost daily basis. The boy must have felt that terror or the danger because he walked on shaking legs to follow Overhaul into the alley. All Eri remembers after that is feeling incredibly dizzy and lightheaded, a feeling of some type of lightness making her want to almost giggle if she knew how. Oh God, the boy slurred out as his steps began to stumble and he tripped, almost dropping Eri on multiple occasions as he continued to walk forward. Why does this feel weird? He questioned as he fell against a wall, sliding down it until he was on the ground with her in his lap. Eri knew why. She had felt like this once before when she had gone on an escape attempt. It was one of the 8 men, Todoroki, that Overhaul had brought in to stand with him. His quirk always made Eri feel weird when she got too close to him. Knock them both out and return them to the main building. We'll need to run some tests on the boy and make sure he actually is quirkless before we do much else with him. Overhaul was speaking, but she couldn't understand him. Her head much too light, and the warmth of the boy was just lulling her into sleep. It was so nice to feel so safe for once. Isn't that da uniforms? 𝐔𝐬𝐽 Eri sat on her bed, holding her knees against her chest as she watched the door of her bedroom. It was a large metal door that had several bolts on the outside of it, along with a single keyhole that only a couple of people had the key for. She was waiting for Overhaul to return and remake her, turn her into a puddle and then put her back together again. It was going to be painful, as always, but she felt that she could handle it. She had already been drained of the red stuff and remade, with the nice boy watching it all. Then he had been dragged away for some reason. As long as the boy from before was safe and returned to her, she would put up with the treatment as long as the boy hadn't been made into a puddle like so many of her caretakers from before. She really hoped that she could wrap herself up in those warm arms once more and be safe once again, even if for a little bit. So she was surprised when her door was slammed open and said boy was in her room with Overhaul and Chrono right behind him. Eri, in front of me now, Overhaul ordered as he pointed his hand to the side where the boy moved to stand. He was off to the side where her bathroom was located and was shaking like Eri herself was. She didn't dare disobey, already knowing what was coming as she stepped in front of the older man, head bowed and hands clutching at her white dress. She was terrified for what was coming because she knew that it was going to be nothing but painful at this point. You see here Midoriya, a little girl that doesn't like to listen and fights against me all the time. Overhaul began as he turned his focus on the boy, glaring at him. I've allowed you to live and you now belong to me just like her. So let me show you what happens when my things fight against me. Eri didn't even try and dodge the hand that landed on her head. The pain of being ripped apart into little pieces was something she would never be able to describe. It was painful to the point where she wouldn't be able to cry, just shake and tremble on the floor like the little mouse Overhaul called her. Now was no different. The pain was indescribable and left her voiceless afterwards. The same could not be said for the boy, who was now at her side and pulling her to his chest, hugging her tightly. "WHWH, why would you do that?" he questioned as he held to her tightly, trying to give her comfort via his own warm body. Eri burrowed herself into his chest and held tightly to him, trying so hard to hide away from the pain. She's just a little girl, so she knows what will happen when she disobeys. Though I suppose I'll need to figure something else for a punishment. She's no longer responding to this one and instead tries to run away more often. He mused for a moment before the sensation of his eyes landed on the two once more. She does seem to like you very much already, though I don't quite understand why. Tell me, Eri, do you like Midoriya? Midoriya, was that the boy that was holding her? She looked up, noticing that he had a splash of blood right across his face and on his shirt. He must have been in range of when she was remade, and Overhaul didn't bother to gather the blood off of him when she was put back together. His eyes shined with fear and anger, but she was sure for some strange reason that the emotions were not aimed at her. She turned back towards Overhaul and nodded her head hesitantly. She liked Midoriya a lot. He was kind and gentle and warm, and his voice was like the wind that flowed around her. She hoped that he wouldn't be remade into a puddle like so many of her caretakers. I see. Well then, let's see if this lesson will get it in your head not to go anywhere then, he stated as he walked forward, ripping her from Midoriya and instead placing his ungloved hand onto his head harshly. Eri screamed as she watched the boy's wide eyes turn into a splatter of blood against the floor, only his lower body left. No, put him back, she screamed as she flailed in Overhaul's grip, trying to get to the blood splatter. I'll be good. I promise. I'll be good. Just put him back. Seems this will be a very good deterrent for you then, Overhaul mused as he placed his hand on the blood splatter, and suddenly the boy was back, gasping heavily as he stared at the wall, eyes blank. You'll be allowed 3 days to leave and gather items from your place of residence. Cut any and all ties with whoever you have left on the outside. Then you are to return here, Overhaul stated to the boy as he released Eri back to the floor and stared at the boy with glowing golden eyes. I am being generous with this time I am providing you. Do not waste it and return as quickly as possible. Chrono, take him and drop him off wherever he requires. He waved his hand at his right hand. Eri watched as the boy was dragged from the room, eyes blinking rapidly as he stared at Eri in horror and fear. She wasn't sure if it was for her or because of her. Now Eri, we have an appointment. Let us be on our way. She could do nothing but follow him now that she knew he wasn't afraid to hurt others to make her listen. Izuku stared at his teachers as he remembered what had happened and what he was going to have to do. Between the forced X-ray and then having overhaul him twice in one day, he was exhausted. But this wasn't even the last of the things he needed to do. His mom sat at his side with tears running down her face while Aizawa and Recovery Girl conversed. All Might had returned not too long ago with a grim expression before smiling at his successor in assurance. Well, he pretty much only had like a day left to return to Overhaul, at least, that's what it felt like. How long was I out? He questioned as he looked at his mom. Pretty much all night. I got here early in the morning. The sun wasn't even out yet, she explained as she looked over to where the sun was no peeking through the window, which meant he hadn't even been out for 24 hours yet. He had 2 days left and then some. He needed to let them know what was going on and get his things together so that he could return to her. She needed him and he wasn't about to leave her behind to suffer. She needed a hero and Izuku was going to make sure she had one. So with that in mind, he waved to get his teacher's gaze on him and began to explain everything he could remember. Eri was so very tired. It had been a long couple of days. She was pulled into the room with all the tubes and needles and other things multiple times, and she hurt. She was finally getting somewhat of a break as she was sure she was going to break soon. It helped that her curse had gotten out of hand again, so Overhaul had decided that it was time for her to rest. He didn't want her to continue to lose control like that, especially since it spoke of a limit she could quite grasp. So she was left alone in her room, hugging a blanket tightly around her to keep her warm and keep the chill away from her. Not that it really helped since she was tired and weak and her body just wasn't generating the heat that it should. She was always like this after long sessions with the bad room and after her curse causes problems. Overhaul let her know how much trouble she had caused too because of her curse. One of the doctors that had been working on her in the bad room had disappeared because of how close he was. Overhaul had to replace him now, and it would take time to find one that would work towards the goal he wanted without ratting him out. That meant more work for him and more work for Eri too. She'd be back in the bad room in 2 days' time. That's what he had told her, and she couldn't run away since the green-haired boy, Midoriya, would be harmed if she did. All she could do was comply with what he wanted of her. There would be no more running away. The door creaked as it was opened and she buried herself underneath her blanket, hiding away from whoever was there. She wasn't supposed to go to the bad room for a couple days, but that didn't mean Overhaul would keep to that. He'd said it before and had pulled her in only hours later. She listened as stumbling footsteps entered her room and then the door was slammed shut. She didn't know what was going on. That had never happened before. Normally footsteps would occur, either leaving food or pulling her out of the room, and then the door would shut after whoever had left the room. She'd never had footsteps come in and then the door shut, locking behind whoever was in. It was a long few silent moments before those steps moved around the room. She wasn't sure what they were looking for, but it was making her tremble in her bed, awaiting the pain that would come. That's all there ever was. It wasn't until she shifted slightly, her legs going all tingly, that the footsteps stopped. Eri held her breath to try and stay hidden, but she knew it was too late. She'd been spotted. The footsteps moved towards her and the bed, making the trembling much worse, her fear increasing as they got closer and closer to her. She held tight to the blanket as she felt the person sit on her bed. They sat like that for what seemed forever before she felt a tapping on the sheet. Just tapping, nothing more than that. It wasn't even anywhere near her, and it wasn't moving closer, nor was it getting harder. Just a light, gently tap against her blanket to get her attention. With that in mind, she slowly moved until she was at the top of her bed, where the edge of the blanket sat, waiting for her to reveal herself. The tapping was still happening, having not stopped or changed patterns, still just there. It gave her enough courage to poke her head out of the covers and look over to see who was there. She gasped as she settled her eyes on bright green eyes and fluffy green hair. "Midori," she squealed as she crawled over to the teen and onto his lap, where he wrapped her in his arms and pulled her close. "You're back." He nodded his head in agreement as he hugged her tightly, her little hands clutching at the long black t-shirt that he wore. He had on white scrub pants and was barefoot like Eri was. It was obviously things that Overhaul had given him for the time being. Then it settles on her heavily. "You're back," she whispers with tears in her eyes and looks up at him with terror. That meant that Overhaul would hurt him like he did her or her caretakers. If she didn't obey, then he would be hurt instead of herself. He smiled sadly down at her and hugged her closer. She could feel all the warmth and safety in his hold and couldn't wait to hear his voice. He hadn't said a word yet. She looked up at him and tilted her head. "Can't you speak?" That made his eyes sadder and he shook his head, one hand moving up to cup his throat. "Is it hurt?" He shook his head and tried to say something, but nothing came out of his mouth. "It's okay, you can speak when you're ready." She snuggled back into his chest, wondering if he wasn't going to speak because he was scared, like she was scared to sleep sometimes. Either way, she was still happy but sad that he was back here. She really hoped that he wouldn't be hurt, especially if she behaved. If she behaved, then he'd be safe from being remade. She was sure of it. With that thought in mind, she made herself a promise. She would keep him safe from Overhaul by being the best behaved girl ever. He wouldn't have a reason to punish Midori if she behaved and did as she was told. Yes, she would behave so that he was safe from being remade. "SJLG," she screamed as blood splattered all over in front of her, not understanding what she did wrong, as Midori was made into a puddle not even a day later. She had promised herself she'd behaved. She had followed Overhaul into the bad room with Midori at her side. She had sat on the table and waited for the needles to come and take her blood. She hadn't even squirmed. She had held tightly to Midori's hand as the first needle was shoved into her. Where had it gone wrong after the fifth one was shoved into her? "I told you to release him, Eri." Overhaul spoke up, catching her horrified attention. "When I tell you to release, I expect you to release." She hadn't even heard him say that. She was focused so hard on the needles being inserted into her and the comfort of the other boy's hand in her own. She gulped and nodded her head, trying so hard to ignore the tears falling down her face. She gasped in relief as Overhaul returned the boy back to his original state, though his eyes were glassy and his body slow to move when ordered to move off to the side. It had hardly been a day and already Eri had failed the safe and warmth that had given up so much to stay with her. She had failed and she wanted to scream at that fact. Only she didn't. She held perfectly still as the other needles were shoved into her body, draining her of the red liquid, and his skin was cut away. Her eyes stayed on the boy that sat off to the corner, his dull eyes watching her quietly as she was used up and then remade. It was only when she was returned to his warm arms that she realized it had foolish to make that promise. She could never protect him and he could never protect her. They were both trapped in Overhaul's grip and neither were going to be able to escape. She cried into his chest that night, his hold only tightening on her as the two laid on her bed. SJLG Izuku held tight to Eri as he tried to bring himself back to himself. Being ripped apart like that was painful and just the memory made him flinch. It was only the third time he had been remade and he already hated it with a passion. He couldn't even imagine what Eri went through having to feel that whenever she was remade after a session. He really hoped he could hold on. He had given all the information over to Aizawa-sensei that he could. The facility's location, the pattern to the hidden door, the lackeys that Overhaul had in their quirks, and everything on Eri he could remember. He just hoped they put all the information to good use soon. He wasn't sure how he was going to stay sane if he continued to be overhauled like that again and again. There was no lying to himself either, that it wouldn't happen again, because he already knew that it would. He was the stick used to beat Eri, and Eri was his own, to keep them in line and to listen to whatever Overhaul wanted of them. So he prayed the heroes would arrive soon. Come hang out honestly. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel about being moved into the teachers' dorms. It was confusing and intimidating to be completely surrounded by the adults all of the time, to the point where he sequestered himself into his room almost all of the time that first week. It was easy since he had his own little kitchen and living room, so keeping to himself was the easier of the choices. That didn't mean he didn't go over to Heights Alliance to see his friends all the time though. He loved seeing his friends, no matter the setting, so he spent as much time as he could there. All he had to do was tell one of the teachers that he was heading over, and one of them would walk with him and then sit in the living room with something to do and keep an eye on things. Especially when Bakugo was in the room with his own group of friends. It was great, just hanging out and doing homework. He was happy to be here with his friends and classmates, keeping up with gossip and any new change in their quirk or fighting style. He was even able to help out with the homework for Ashido and Kaminari every now and then, especially when Bakugo was too busy doing chores for the dorms. Right at this moment, it was like the third day of both of their punishments, and he was sitting at the table in front of the sectional doing homework with his normal friend group, plus Kaminari and Ashido and Kirishima. They had received an art project from Midnight that day, who refused to give any hints on it even though she was sitting off to the side with her own pile of paperwork. Izuku had peeked some of their tests in there and had seen some of the grades, but he kept that to himself. So far they hadn't gotten too far on the project, since everyone at the table excluding Izuku himself had no idea who their hero was, so they had to look up who they had. Most the heroes they were given were along the older generations of heroes and weren't super well known anymore, having faded to time. Izuku had always been in love with heroes, older and newer ones, so had done his research on all of them at some point. So this assignment was going to be simple for him to do, but that also meant that his classmates were flocking to him for help. That included Ashido, who was now scooching closer towards him, little by little, with a look in her eye that was making him nervous. "Hey Midoriya, you know heroes really well, don't ya?" she asked as she leaned towards him. Izuku gulped nervously as he leaned away from her as best he could. Uriaraka was on his other side and he couldn't lean too far without touching her as well. He really wasn't in the mood for touch at the moment and really didn't want to deal with it. I do. He agreed easily, leaning backwards now that he couldn't lean to the side much more. The pink-haired girl was really crowding into his space and he really wasn't appreciating it. "Suo," she gave a wide smile as she dragged the word out. "Do you think you could help me out with the hero I have? I have no clue the first thing about them and I don't know how to look them up," she stated as she leant even closer and Izuku scooted away from the table. It was either that or hit the floor to get away. I don't mind helping," he said as his shoulders hunched up towards his ears. Why did the girl up to get so close to him? Why did she have to get so in his space when he was obviously not appreciative of the close proximity? "But, could you please back up?" he asked, hoping that would help get some of his space back. "Oh, you're going to help Mina?" Uriaraka exclaimed as she wrapped her arms around her neck suddenly, leaning her upper body into his back and shoulders as her head came to lay against his ear. "Can you help me too?" He hadn't been having a good day. The lights were bright when he had woken up that morning and his skin prickled at the clothes that rubbed at it. He knew it was a prelude to one of his normal panic attacks, but he wasn't sure if it would lead to an overload as well. Sometimes he would have sensory overloads, but they didn't always happen with panic attacks, which he thought was lucky. But he wasn't lucky enough to avoid them entirely. He still got them every now and then, and with his skin prickling, he thought he might have one coming up. That was why he had no real want or need for touch that day, avoiding it like the plague unless absolutely necessary. It was lucky that he was under punishment and so wasn't allowed part of the heroics classes, or he'd have gone over the edge long before now. But that didn't seem to register with his classmates at the moment, who were all intent on getting into his space for any reason. It was driving him further and further towards that edge, and he could already feel his skin start to spike with pain and preparation. He quickly shrugged out from under Uriaraka and gathered his things, shoving them into his backpack as quickly as possible as he smiled at his friends shakily. I'm going to get my notebooks." He waved at them before hurriedly disappearing from the living room without looking back. His skin screamed with the pain of his clothes rubbing against his skin, and the lights were burning his eyes. Back in the living room, Uriaraka and Mina both shared looks that were shocked and confused. What the hell just happened? The pink-skinned girl questioned as she turned and watched Midnight pack her things and follow the green-haired boy out. "I have no clue." The gravity girl slumped back into her seat, cheeks puffed out as she tried to figure out what had just occurred. "I don't think I've seen Deku ever leave us behind like that before." He did not look quite well. Ada shot in as he waved his arms around like the giant robot he was. "He's been pale all day," Todoroki stated next as he continued to write, ignoring the looks the others shot him. "I figured if he felt bad enough, he'd just go to the infirmary." We're talking about Deku here. He wouldn't go to recovery girl on the verge of death, let alone a cold Kira. Sue flipped through a book, trying to find the hero she needed to do research on as well. She really wasn't interested in getting into a friend's business unless absolutely necessary, and Midoriya hadn't looked like he wanted them to at the moment. I mean, Sue is right, but I don't think that's what it was, Hiroshima said as he worried his lip between his teeth, having to pay attention so that he didn't accidentally bite through. He had done that a few times growing up, and it was not fun to have stitches in your lip. It just seemed like he didn't want to be here. Why wouldn't he want to be here though? Denki had a pencil balanced on his nose as he looked towards his friend. I would think being with the teachers all the time would be boring or stressful. It's stressful during the day in the classroom after all. You're all fucking idiots if you don't understand why the shitty nerd left. Bakugo had bags of trash in either hand, a glare on his face, and bandages that still sat on his cheeks, much like Midoriya. Fucking shitty ass extras don't know shit about respecting another's fucking space. He grumbled out as he left out the front doors to dump the trash. The group of individuals sat in silence for a moment before glancing at one another. Did Bakugo just admit to knowing something about Madabro? Hiroshima questioned as he looked back over to where his friend disappeared. I really don't like that. Uraraka huffed as she crossed her arms angrily. Bakugo has no right to know Deku as well as he does. They did grow up together, Kiro. Doesn't mean we have to like it. She hissed. Show all he wanted to do was hole up in his room after an entire day of cleaning the damn dorms and serving the shitty extras as they treated him like a fucking servant. It was driving him up a fucking wall, and he wanted to be separated from them for some time. But he couldn't. Deku was up in the upper echelon of the dorms, and he couldn't fucking go to his room where he was safe from the scrutinizing eyes of one snipe. He knew that he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Deku as much as possible when they were in the dorms, at least not when he could be watched by a teacher at all times when they couldn't see Deku. So, to make sure that Deku could hang with his friends and make sure that Bakugo was nowhere near the nerd, they made him stay in the common room with the teachers instead. He'd have to wait to continue the cleaning upstairs after the shit rag left, but that was okay. That meant he could make sure the cleaning downstairs was done right in the first place, though it didn't help his nerves one bit when a teacher always had their eyes on him. His hands sweated nitroglycerin for God's sake. If he got it all over the dorms because he was constantly under pressure from a teacher, he could injure his classmates without meaning to. It was a terrifying prospect, but he made sure not to show it to any of the teachers who watched. And he made sure to always wipe behind him with the specialized cleaner to negate the chemicals of his sweat. That didn't make this situation any easier than it needed to be. He hated authority. Ever since middle school, where the teachers were shit and he was allowed to do whatever the fuck he wanted, they never stopped any of the shit of the students, never stepped in to help the fucking weak, and they always made him feel like he was high in the food chain than even them. Now he was in a school where the teachers were quick to jump his attitude towards them and his classmates. They always stepped in when someone was being bullied. They always made him feel like a weak little boy that couldn't do shit right, no matter how hard he tried. He hated feeling weak, absolutely detested it. His mother was a powerful woman that worked a good and powerful job herself, making herself rather famous in the wedding planner world and also in the fashion designer world as well. With his father next to her, the two were unstoppable. But she was not immune to her own weakness. She always felt like she could do better, and when she didn't, she felt powerless and weak. It made her depressed and exhausted in a way that Bakugo could relate to, because he did the exact something. Except instead of getting angry and punching a bag of sand, she had turned to the bottle and drank herself into oblivion. That had made her anger more prevalent to her family, taking it out on the child, the weakest of the three, and making sure he stayed weaker than her. She made sure that Katsuki would always feel weaker than her. It was a feeling he carried with him everywhere, and it was a feeling that he felt right in that moment. He glared at Snipe, making sure that he knew that he hated the man and the feelings that he was making the teen feel. A feeling that bubbled up in his chest and made him want to scream. Make sure that the man and the other heroes knew that he wasn't weak. He growled as he ripped away from the man and instead walked over to the kitchen where he made sure some of the wipes he used were located. He needed to make sure that he didn't get his sweat all over the place, and the stare down with the fucking cowboy had made him sweat more than he already was. Shoei had a shitty day. Izuku couldn't help hate everything about his friends and classmates that day. They were always so loud and boisterous, letting their thoughts and opinions be known, never letting another person tell them to be quiet, and instead being extra loud just because. The only person who seemed to quiet his class at all was Aizawa-sensei, and that was just barely. It normally took the man growling in his low voice and activating his quirk to get a total silence, one that Izuku normally relished before the chaos started up again. He had known that morning it would be hard. His clothes were rubbing against his skin in an irritating way, and the sounds around him were much too loud. They pounded against his ears and created a migraine that made him sensitive to the lights and made the noise even worse. Thank God it hadn't been a practical heroics class that day, or Izuku would have been in utter hell. Either way, Izuku waved off his friends, telling them that he was going to head back to his dorm room to study for a while on his own. With that, he made a beeline for the teachers' dorms where he knew it wouldn't be anywhere near as loud and he'd be able to relax. It was always much quieter in the teachers' dorms. He wasn't sure if it was because they were adults and had better control over themselves or just because they preferred a calmer setting outside of their hero work. Either way, he was able to relax better there than he was at the students' dorms, as there was less noise and less people that wanted to touch him. So forgive him for breathing in a sigh of relief when he entered the front entry hall of the dorm and shucked his shoes off. He didn't both grabbing the slippers in his box and instead just walked straight in so that he could head to his room. Little listener, how is classes today? Izuku blinked as he turned towards the counter where Present Mike was standing, a bowl of something in his hand, obviously about to make something. I hope that Shu wasn't too harsh you and your little butt is today. Izuku shrugged as they edged towards the stairs. He liked talking with Present Mike, especially after classes were done. The man was always friendly and vibrant and knew what to say to get Izuku to laugh when they interacted in the dorms. Though the teen was still getting used to seeing his teachers in normal clothes, much like how Present Mike now had his hair washed and in a bun, with black square glasses and wearing a long-sleeved gray shirt with sweatpants. The man always dressed casually in the dorms. It was loud today. He gave us his way of explanation. I see, one of those types of days. The man's voice seemed to lower at the news before nodding towards the stairs. Why don't you head up to your room and I'll bring some cookies by later. You can just chill and relax for the day. I'll let the others know to let you have your quiet time. Izuku smiled at that before nodding his head. He didn't waste time getting up to his room and just curling up on his couch with his homework out in front of him, enjoying the silence with the soundproof headphones his mom had gotten him forever ago. He hardly even noticed when a plate of cookies were slipped through a crack at his door before it closed. He was left to his own devices for the night, but Izuku didn't mind. He enjoyed it. It was the last day of his punishment, and he had just finished the last of the chores for the day as well. He was ready to go and hide in his room and not have to deal with any of the teachers and the extras' attitudes. Ever since they came back from the fucking movies and found out he was a jackass to Deku, a lot of the class had been cold towards him. Those that called themselves the Baka Squad had been the only ones that hadn't completely ignored him. Shitty hair and knockoff Pikachu and the tape dispenser had stuck around and would hang out with him after school ended and he was done with his chores. Pinky had taken off and hadn't talked to him for a while now. Not after he hadn't denied the accusations. It honestly hurt that she had left like she had, but he could understand. He was a shit stain that had caused Deku a great deal of pain. He wouldn't deny that, was past denying what he had done to the other boy. That didn't mean it didn't hurt when he lost his own friends because of mistakes he had made in the past. He guessed he understood how Deku felt now about losing a friend or multiple friends since Katsuki's friend group had been Deku's. Once he had abandoned the shitty nerd, their friends had abandoned him as well. That meant he had lost more than just Bakugo as a friend, and that hurt him a little bit more now that he thought it over. Either way, he sighed as he dragged his thoughts away from Pinky and Deku, and instead towards his bed that was now waiting for him. He couldn't wait to return to classes and to hero training. It had been a long week of doing workouts in his room that got repetitious since he couldn't do a whole lot in such a small area. He was just about to his room when the door right next to his shitty hairs was slammed open, his arm was grabbed, and he was yanked into the room almost violently. What the ever-living fuck? He roared as he turned towards the redhead idiot with the other two 𝗵𝗵𝐵𝑖ngos behind him. The biggest surprise was that Pinky was in the room too. Look, we need to talk to you, bro. Shitty hair started as he dragged the blonde over to his bed and made him sit on the edge, the rest of the squad standing around him with rather serious looks on their faces. We've got a lot to go over and we don't want to stay up all night doing this, so do us a favor and shut up and listen before you start screaming, Pinky stated as she crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at him as she kicked a hip out. She looked like his mom when she was taking none of his shit, so he grumbled but stayed quiet. We're here to stage an intervention, so I saw stated with a shit-eating grin. We want you to know that the shit that you've been doing isn't going to fly anymore. The insults and declarations of death, as funny as they seemed before, with the new info we got from Mido, we aren't sure you're just joking anymore. Pika cut in next, his smile fading away as he waved a hand at Bakugo. We want to assume that you actually think we're all friends, but, well, we aren't really sure anymore. Which, fair, he could understand that. Normally he just shouted and screamed to make sure they knew he was above them and that he wouldn't take any shit from them. It had slowly verged upon as playful as he could be as time went on. Though, he wasn't sure they understood that the explosions he set off now were just to dissipate some of the sweat and to make sure he wasn't going to make anyone sick. The explosions wouldn't hurt them, maybe sting or give off a little heat, but not hurt. Not to mention the blasts that you slam into Kiri all the time. She placed a hand on said teen's shoulder with a growl. You could hurt him and not give a shit, like you did with Mido, I'm sure. He winced at that as he glared at her. Fucking shitty hair was never in any real danger, ever. Between his hardening and Bakugo's own weakened blasts when he did attack, he would have no damage at all. To think that the idiot was weak enough for his own weak attacks to hurt, well, that was insulting to him, which seemed to catch the redhead's own attention. Hey no, I have no problem with those, especially since he isn't going full strength with them anyways, he stated before turning back to the blonde. Though that doesn't excuse the fact that you do that, and if it was anyone else, well, the damage could be bad. Yeah man, you've left me with burns before. The other blonde waved his hand. Did they fucking scar? He questioned with a growl, knowing already that they hadn't. That's not the point, Pinky shouted as she stepped forward. It doesn't matter if it scarred or if we didn't take offense or if no one was actually hurt in any way. The fact that you act like this and think it's okay to just spit and throw abuse around like this is the problem. I don't fucking abuse any one of the shitty extras. He slammed to his feet as he met the pink girl's eyes full on. I don't fucking throw anything at anyone that they can't damn well handle. Except you don't know what they or us can handle, she screamed as she got right into his face. You don't know everything we've been through or the trauma we carry or the pain of our pasts. 𝗵𝘃𝗲, I think he gets it. Shitty hair tried to pull her out of his stunned face, but Bakugo already knew that she would not be moved from her place in front of him, slamming him with facts that he hadn't considered before. No, I don't think he does, or he would have thought of this shit long before he ever started calling us by those stupid degrading nicknames. She shot at him with a frown. Before he started treating you like a punching bag like those jackasses in middle school did. That made the blonde turn to the redhead in shock. He could never imagine the sunshine child of their group being bullied by anyone. He was always so strong and capable, and so he didn't think his actions would reflect anything he had already been through. Though that did prove Mina's point in a startling way. He hadn't known anything about any of the group that called themselves his friends. Nothing at all, and yet he dared to yell and scream and make fun of them. Like a bully, he let his head fall forward and his hands to fist before he shoved them into his pockets. He really hadn't changed from when he was in middle, not at all. Mina, I know that, but we can't just scream at him like this, it won't help anything, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said as he pulled the girl away from him, creating a distance he hadn't realized he needed. Yeah, well, maybe it'll get it through his stupid spiky skull, she grumbled as she crossed her arms once more and hunched her shoulders up to her ears. Yeah, but screaming isn't gonna do anything. 𝗬𝗪 used a pinky to dig earwax from his ear as he gave the troublesome blonde a bored look. He's so stuck up and stubborn in his ways. Might take more than just this one intervention to really get him to listen. He huffed as he glared at the black-haired teen. No, I heard 𝗧𝗵𝗲 loud and clear. That made the group pause as they looked at him in shock. He actually knows my name. She blinked in surprise. He gave her a deadpan look and a shrug of his shoulders. Fuck yeah, I do. I know everyone's names, just didn't think it was worth using them. Seems I was wrong about that. That got the group to smile. It seems that this intervention actually worked. Kaminari cheered as he waved his hands around with a bright smile. Hell yeah, it did. 𝗬𝗪 held his hand up and accepted the high five from his shorter friend with glee, sharing one with a just as excited Mina. The blonde huffed and shook his head. It wouldn't fix everything that he had done since the start of the year, but he figured this would be a start. Come on you idiots, let's watch a movie, he suggested as he turned towards the door, ready to lead them down to watch a movie and relax. He smirked at the cheers behind him. Show he was getting ready to absolutely scream. He loved his friends. They were always so great to him and always gave him the love he absolutely desired for so long. But most of them had no real concept of personal space at all, except for a select few. Those being Todoroki, Takoyami, Kuta, Tsu, and Ajiro. It had been a very simple day, and it was all going rather straightforward when they had decided to just enjoy themselves in the common room, playing video games and enjoying the snacks that Sato and Tsu had made that day. A release from school and all the hard assignments and exams they had to take. Some of the others that were waiting for their turns at the games or just watching were all lounging around as they watched the going on with amusement or impatience. Depended on which of the two you were, waiting or just watching. Everyone was chatting with each other, while the ones playing were all screaming at each other to get the hell out of each other's ways or about cheap shots. Who knew Mario Kart could get so violent? Either way, even with Bakugo screaming his head off after he got blue-shelled by Shoji of all people, Izuku was enjoying himself on one of the beanbag chairs that was off to the side of the sectional. This way he could still talk and interact with his classmates, but he had a space that was his own, especially if he needed to make sure he had his own space to stay calm. Crowded spaces still made him nervous, especially after his interaction with Shigaraki at the mall, having been so crowded with so many civilians, and he was left stuck in the middle of it all with a hand wrapped around his throat. Making sure he had space to escape or move around had become a rather vital action as of late. Either way, it was such a relaxed and exciting atmosphere, contradictions that worked with his class just about anywhere they went. He was enjoying it, was leaning back into his beanbag as he watched with contentment, giving his input into the conversation that Ada, Uraraka, and Todoroki were all having on the couch next to him. Sue occupied another beanbag chair that was about a yard away from him and was enjoying Uraraka braiding her hair behind her, so peaceful that he was just about ready to fall asleep in his beanbag, until a scream ripped through the air and a body slammed into his own as hands desperately scrabbled at his limbs. He panicked and tried to get out from underneath the other as his quirk acted up, blessedly rolling whoever off of him and onto the floor, where they scrambled to climb onto Tsu instead. What the hell was that for a 𝐻𝐸𝐻? Bakugo growled as he and the rest of the class stared at the pink-skinned girl. There's a spider, she screamed as she pointed at the coffee table where she had been sitting waiting for a turn at the game. Are you serious? You screamed over a spider. Jiro raised a brow at the other girl even as she shook her head. Kuda, can you take care of it for us? I don't think it's right to hurt it since it hasn't hurt us. The shy boy nodded his head as he walked over and held his hand out to the spider, whispering to it. Since the exam with Present Mike, his fear of insects and spiders had lessened greatly and had become one of his greatest weapons. Well, then, since that's been taken care of, I'm going back to beating the shit out of everyone here, Kaminari declared as he turned back to the game. What the heck, Bakugo? You snooze, you lose, Pikachu. The smirk sent the other's way was wide and shit-eating. Izuku ignored the conversation that continued on and instead allowed himself to lower down into the beanbag chair once more, his entire body shaking from the scare and the scream. It left his ears ringing and his body tingling in a way that he knew would be hard to come down from. If something else happened, he'd probably hit a sensory overload again, and that was something he wanted to keep quiet for a while yet, which wouldn't matter if he screamed in frustration at that moment, but he kept himself from doing so just for prosperity's sakes. He sits there for several moments before a voice brings his attention away from the way his skin tingles uncomfortably. Midoriya-chan, do you want to head back to your dorm, Kiro? Sue questions as she looked at the boy with a tilted head. You do look quite pale. Maybe retreating for your health would be best. Ada agreed as he pushed his glasses up. Rest would do you well in any case, as I'm unsure of whether you've been getting enough sleep or not. We would understand if you need to step away, Deku. Uraraka stated next with a serious look on her face. We know how loud the dorms can get sometimes and how you like the quiet at times. Todoroki nodded his head along with the others, giving Izuku one of his patented blank stares that held a caring hint in his eyes. Izuku took a shaky breath before shaking his head with a shy smile on his face. Yes, his friends could be loud and chaotic, to the point of making him want to scream. That was something he had known for a long time. But they were also caring and understanding and knew exactly what he needed when it came down to it. So instead of getting up and leaving like he would have just a few days before, he instead snuggled down into the beanbag chair and looked at the four closest of his friend group. Nah, I think 𝐒𝐿 here. He would enjoy his friends' presences for as long as possible before he retreated back to his dorm in the teacher's building. After all, they were his friends and he owed them his time and presence so that they could continue to have each other's backs. His skin fucking itched all over as he sat at the kitchen table with several notebooks, books, and papers spread out in front of him. Katsuki had been working on his shitty homework for some time now. The Baka squad, having decided to take a break about 15 minutes ago, had disappeared outside. Lazy assholes that they were. He, however, wasn't one to shirk his godforsaken work and had decided to continue until he was completely done. And since Deku was in the building with his friends up in Sonic's room, he was stuck down here so that the teacher on duty, Aizawa this time, could make sure the two didn't run into each other by accident without the supervision. It meant that he couldn't go up to his room since the hobo was too lazy to follow him up and do his damn job, which was whatever. Fine, he could survive a while down in the living room and kitchen under the watch of the one least hated teachers he had. It helped that Aizawa didn't always have his eyes on the blonde, knowing that the teen wouldn't dare try and disappear while the other problem child was out of sight. It made this a whole lot more bearable at the moment, until he realized that he needed a book he had left up in his room for an assignment from the hobo himself. He cursed under his breath as he tried to remember what exactly was in the text so that he could avoid asking the other to allow him up to his room long enough to get said book. Only he already knew the hobo wouldn't allow it, so he had to figure something out to get what he needed. He looked up over at his friends' things, hoping they had the crappy book lying around, but it was nowhere to be seen. That was fucking out. So he stood up and walked into the living room and looked at the few extras in there doing homework. None of them had that goddamned book either, which was fucking annoying and was driving him damn well nuts. He grunted as he walked back over to the kitchen table and slumped in his chair, running his hands over his face. He wanted the pressure to go away and to just have his book in his hand so he could do his shittiest homework and be done with the fucking assignment already. It was literally the last one he needed done, and while it wasn't due for a week yet, he wanted it done and out of the way. He fucking hated leaving shit to the last minute and strived to have it complete long before the due date. He groaned to himself as he resigned himself to just waiting until Deku left to go and get the damned book. Bakugo, do you need something? He startled and just about jumped out of his chair with a snarl on his face, but reeled himself back in. He couldn't continue to allow his entire being to run by instincts and anger fueled by fear. So he took several deep breaths, just like that fucking mudhead had advised, before turning to look at the hobo that now stood off to the side of him. "What's it to you?" he questioned, eyes narrowed. He might have been able to control his anger, but that didn't mean his suspicious behavior was the same. Teachers always wanted something from him before. Whether it being named as a supporter of him in school when he became a pro or other such favors, they never didn't want something in return for their help. So he waited to see what this one wanted. Though he had to admit, the hobo sensei hadn't asked for a single thing but for his students' improvement, both as heroes and as their own person. It was startling to have a teacher like the hobo, but also a breath of fresh air. "I don't care much for angsty teenage drama in the kitchen. If you need to get something from your room, just ask." The man nodded towards the elevator before turning to walk over to it. "I'm not going to disrupt your learning over something as simple to fix as this." Bakugo huffed as he followed his teacher, hands shoved into his pockets as he hiked his shoulders up to his ears. He would never admit it to the man, but he was thankful that he had at least one teacher in this entire shitty school that never made him feel inferior in any way. Bullet. He'd lost count. Eri had been drained of blood again and again. She had been remade again and again and again and again. Izuku had been torn apart again and again and again. He had been put back together again and again and again. He lost count of how many times Eri screamed. Whether in pain or fear, it didn't seem to matter because she screamed so very much. Izuku would have been screaming with her, but his voice was still tightly bound in the cage that was his throat. It made reassuring her so hard because he couldn't talk to her, speak in her ear, and let her know everything would be okay. The heroes would be here within the week to save them from the horror that was Chisaki Kai, or Overhaul as they were ordered to call the man. At least, he hoped they'd be there within the week. They had better be there within the week. Izuku had given them as much information as possible and made sure that they could set a plan quickly. That had been his hope, at least, to get Eri and him out of this shitty situation. Not that he hadn't had the chance to back out completely and go the opposite route of working with the heroes to get Eri out that way. Except, if he had gone that route, there was no guarantee that they could save Eri. There were too many escape routes underneath the base. Even with the quick view he had gotten on that first travel around, he had known that Overhaul had multiple ways out. There was no way of knowing which route the man would take, and with him, he would take Eri and continue the torture, and Eri would be alone once more for however long it took to find her. He couldn't allow Eri to be left alone like that. Not when he had a way to get into the base and keep his eyes on the little girl. All he had to do was wait for the right time to escape with the girl while the heroes came to rescue them. That was all he had to do, was be patient and wait. Except it was hard when Overhaul was constantly tearing the two apart over any little slight. It was wearing the two down to the point where it too all they had to even stand up anymore. It made Izuku believe that it would be nearly impossible to get away when the time came. He huffed as he curled around the little girl that had her face hidden in his neck, the two laying on their sides in her little bed. He had covered them in the pink comforter that she had, trying to gain some warmth to their bodies as they recuperated from the latest draining session the two went through. Another addition to this nightmare to just watching Eri get drained of her blood every day. Izuku was now being drained of his as well, to help advance the creation of the quirk-erasing bullet they were creating. Apparently the blood of a quirkless kid was much different than those with a quirk, or those born with quirks. A strange but interesting discovery that Izuku had learned from this horror story arc of his life. Even with one for all being in his body right this instant, his body was still quirkless. All the examinations he had been forced to go through once he had returned from UA had revealed the hated pinky toe joint, but also his appendix and wisdom teeth as well, useless things that those with quirks didn't have nor suffer from. But despite all of that wonderful information, he still hated the situation that he and Eri were in. The pain and horror was driving him insane, and he was at the point where he was sleeping very little or not at all, just laying waiting for Overhaul and his men to come in and drag them away from this little sad safe haven that the two kids shared. He clutched at Eri just a little tighter, knowing that soon Overhaul would appear to drag them for more draining and more overhauling. "Please, just hurry and save us," Izuku thought as he clenched his eyes tightly closed, praying with all he had that Aizawa-sensei and the other heroes would make their move soon. He wasn't sure how much longer Eri and he could handle the pain. The door slammed open, startling the two children so horrifically that they fell off the bed and onto the floor. Kronos and Overhaul stood at the door, both horrifically agitated to the point that Izuku worried they'd be overhauled right that instant. "Get up, carry the girl," Overhaul ordered before turning and walking out of the room once Izuku had did as told. Izuku didn't waste a second and carried Eri as he followed the other male, Kronos walking behind them with a gun in hand but at his side. Something was happening. The boy knew it, but he couldn't ask what was going on due to his muteness at the moment. So, instead he kept quiet with Eri, both keeping their heads bowed as they followed the other man. Izuku could only hope that it was the heroes that were causing this change in routine and that he would have a chance to get the two out of there once and for all. Bullet, he was so incredibly pissed. Not because anything really terrible had happened. No. That wasn't what he had been pissed about at all. No, Eraserhead was pissed about the fact that Mirio was being reckless and had taken off without any of them being able to follow. He should have erased the teen's quirk before he could get away, but he had been too stunned at the third year's deliberate disregard for his orders, though Nighteye hadn't helped by encouraging the teen to go ahead without them. Now, he was struggling against a couple of the precepts of death with said asshole at his side, Rocklock also keeping up with them as they made their way through the tunnels. It had been a close call when Mimic had tried to separate them, managing to get Fat Gum and Red Riot before Sun Eater had stayed behind to deal with 3 precepts. It had left Rocklock with Eraserhead and Nighteye, 𝗵𝗲 quickly taking off before he could be stopped, which just pissed the teacher off before the 3 continued to move forward. "We'll have to figure out how to get Mimic," the ponytailed hero stated as he looked around. "I can knock the walls down so Eraserhead can use his quirk, but we have to locate him first," Nighteye stated as he looked at the walls all around him, those ridiculously heavy stamps in his hands, ready to throw at a moment's notice. This entire situation was irritating in such a way that Eraser growled out loud, his capture weapon flaring around him briefly before he got his emotions back under control. He was here to save his student, to save a little girl, and to stop a villain. He didn't have time to play hide and seek with a jackass in the walls. With that thought, he activated his quirk and swerved his head back and forth, trying to catch any bit of skin or physical body of the jackass as he could, which was when he caught a hand and a nose poking out in the high corner of a wall, the hand scratching at the nose frantically, as if trying to move as fast as possible without being caught. Too bad Eraserhead's gaze landed on him in that rushed moment, releasing a rather large body of an individual into the open air like a falling leaf from a tree. Nighteye wasted not even a moment and threw one of his many weighted stamps, slamming the body into the opposite wall where Rocklock froze his clothes into place. It was long enough for the Foresight quirk user to leap forward and slam a foot into the villain's head, knocking him out. That was stupidly lucky, Aizawa groused, trying to figure out what godly being was kind enough for the stupid mistake that the villain had made. He wasn't about to complain though, as the hallways quickly warped back to normal and they soon had an open path and easy way to get to their objective. "We'll be out of that luck from here on out," Nighteye huffed out next as the 3 began to run forward, preparing for battle that they could now hear up ahead. 𝗵𝗲 will have made contact with Overhaul and 2 more of his minions, at least 2, and I'm sure he's going to need our help from here on out. "We've got his back," Rocklock stated as he pulled out several boards, ready to throw them and use them as shields as necessary. He'd be helpful against Overhaul as well, since he could freeze any inanimate object into place. That would put a stop to some of the projectiles that Overhaul was sure to make. Not to mention the problem child will be there as well. Aizawa agreed as he increased his speed. He needed to get to his problem child as soon as possible. Who knew what sort of reckless mess he was going to get into if he didn't? Bullet, to be fair. Izuku reacted on mere instinct than any logical thought, especially when a hand appeared out of nowhere in front of him, which was more to his benefit as it was 𝗵𝗲 slamming out of the ground and into Overhaul, sending the villain flying away from him for quite a ways. Chronos and Shin staring in bafflement for only a moment. Izuku's movement to go backwards and then to the right saved him from the grabby hands that Shin made at him while Chronos used his quirk to try and slow 𝗵𝗲 down. It was a good thing Izuku already knew that the blonde would be safe as long as he used his quirk to prevent himself from being hit. Shin hadn't even paid any attention to the teen yet, more intent on grabbing a hold of Izuku so that he could force the boy to go in the direction that he wanted. Izuku ignored all of that and instead leapt away, his quirk finally thrumming through his body and allowing him to leap further away and out of reach. "What the fuck?" He lied. "He has a fucking quirk," Shin shouted as he pulled out a gun and aimed at Izuku. "Don't shoot." The order came calmly and slowly, all eyes instantly moving towards where Overhaul was pulling himself off of the floor. He still has the toe joint, so he must have gotten that quirk from All for One. The Yakuza boss settled his gaze onto a visibly pale and startled Izuku. He's still, in essence, quirkless. The toe joint is absolute proof of that. There's no discrediting it after so many studies have been done on it. He tilted his head before turning to where 𝗵𝗲 was staring at the boss in determination. Another pest to get rid of. How annoying. He moved to remove his gloves. "I'm here to stop you and to take the 2 kids with me," 𝗵𝗲 stated as he prepared to attack once more. "Your reign ends here, Overhaul. You won't hurt them or anyone else anymore." Izuku stared at the older student like he was completely insane as the blonde's body tensed to leap forward. He had to stop the older boy before he made a disaster of a mistake. Overhaul wasn't one he was supposed to be fighting alone. Overhaul was one he had to fight with a large team that could back him up, not a little girl and a terrified teen as his only witness. Where was Aizawa-sensei or Nighteye, or any other pro that was supposed to be on this raid? They needed them here and they weren't anywhere they were needed the most. 𝗵𝗲 wouldn't be able to fight Overhaul on his own. There was no way, not with how powerful the other man was. They needed his sensei and the others now. Izuku panicked as he watched 𝗵𝗲 move forward and Izuku moved as well. He managed to grab a hold of his cape and rip him backwards and away from the villains just as Shin fired a bullet. Hopefully it was a normal one and not a quirk-erasing one, as he pulled all three of their bodies out of the way by sheer force of panic. "Deku, what are you doing?" the older teen asked as he turned to look at the smaller one. Brows furrowed in annoyance and concern as he took the other fully in, as well as the child in his arms. "You need to run with the girl and get out of here. The other pros should be coming soon, so if you go back the way you came, you should meet up with them," he stated as he pushed the teen towards said doorway. Izuku gulped and shook his head. He couldn't allow 𝗵𝗲 to face against the Yakuza boss alone. He wouldn't make it out, especially if those hands made even a minuscule touch on him. His whole body gave a shudder at the remembrance of being overhauled. It was never pleasant and left him tingling for hours afterwards, so he had to make sure that 𝗵𝗲 didn't fight the monster on his own. It would end horrifically, and there was a chance he would get shot with one of the quirk-erasing bullets, which would spell his end, because then Overhaul could truly kill him. "Listen, I know you're scared," the blonde stated as he met Izuku's eyes, "but you have to trust in me. I have to protect you and the girl, but I can only do that if you trust that I can. You fought me, you know what I'm capable of, so trust that I can take care of myself and handle these guys." That wasn't the problem. Izuku trusted the blonde. He knew that he was capable and powerful. Just like he stated, he had fought Mirio and had lost. He knew his power and strength and his skill. He had no doubt that the third year could handle most situations. But that was with backup and more experienced heroes at his back, not by himself against three powerful enemies. He shook his head as he pulled at the cape and tried to tug the other towards the entrance they had come from. They needed to run and find Sensei, especially since he had an eraser quirk that could stop Overhaul to begin with. Find Sensei, they'd have backup in their ace in the hole, and they'd be safe from any trick Overhaul tried to play. "Go without me, I'll hold them off here," 𝗵𝗲 tried as he pulled at his cape as well, trying to release himself from the younger teen. "The others should be just down the hallway. Just run to them as fast as you can and you should be fine." He shook his head once more, wishing more than anything he could sign to the older teen and that the other knew sign. But he refused to put down the trembling and terrified child in his arms. This wasn't a game. He couldn't just leave Mirio to face off against the villains when he knew they had quirk-erasing bullets on them and wouldn't hesitate to use them, especially to get Eri and him back. With that in mind, he activated his quirk and pulled hard, making the others stumble to the point he was forced to follow at Izuku's pace, which stopped immediately when he heard a bullet be fired. He ripped Mirio in front of him and Izuku's back was left open to the bullet that slammed right into his left shoulder. "Let's see if you'll lose your quirk now, little gem," Overhaul called as all three terrified children stared at him in horror. Bullet Aizawa could only stare in horror as he watched his student be shot with the bullet, left standing in horror as he realized that the teen was quirkless now. At least, he most likely was for a short time, as long as that was a prototype bullet and not a finalized one, hopefully. Nighteye scoffed and scowled as he moved to continue forward. "That imbecile, how dare he lose it?" Aizawa scowled back at the other underground hero before shaking his head. He couldn't focus on the students like this. He had to get back into his hero mindset. He truly wasn't worthy. He was going to absolutely pummel this guy. Eraserhead snarled as he dashed forward, passing Nighteye and Rocklock right behind him. 𝗵𝗲 to the ground, he ordered as his quirk flared at the three in front of him, capture weapon flaring forward to nab the gun out of the one's hands. The blonde didn't hesitate to do his order, slamming the three of them to the ground before covering them with his body and cape. Rocklock leapt forward next, catching the gun that Eraserhead had thrown towards him before slamming it into the ground and locking it into place. "We need to get you kids out of here, especially the ones who can't fight. 𝗵𝗲, take them and get out of here. There'll be nothing but obstacles in this fight," Nighteye stated as he threw a stamp that slammed into the white-clothed individual, 𝗏, that sent the man flying backwards and away. Eraserhead didn't waste time in wrapping Overhead into his capture weapon and slamming him into the ground. His eyes were already burning, so he had to hurry and end this before he blinked. "Protect them, 𝗵𝗲. Now that Deku doesn't have a quirk, he'll be defenseless until he can get his feet under him. Don't let him fall while protecting that girl." "But Sensei, I can help," the blonde argued as he pulled the greenette to his feet and started pushing him towards the exit. "I can help take them down. The League is in the building," Eraserhead stated. "I have to blink," he stated just as he did so, hair falling back down around his face. His scarf was instantly destroyed, but that didn't stop him from pulling his knife to replace it. "But the League in the area, that means Midoriya is in even more danger. He'll need protection now that he's quirkless." He really wanted to punch Nighteye, as the man knew they needed to use their hero names, not civilian, no matter the circumstances or dislike they had. Not to mention to just state a potential weakness to everyone in the room, even if it wasn't true. He had all the faith that Deku could protect himself and those around him even if he was completely quirkless. That boy had too much of a brain to make him weak in any situation. 𝗵𝗲 still looked conflicted until Izuku moved from underneath his arm, poking his head up to look at his sensei with relieved eyes. "Listen to us and go, we can handle them." Rocklock stated as he moved to stop a spike hitting them head-on. It was lucky that he just needed to focus on something inorganic to make it lock into place. Eraserhead, you'll have to take the lead and stop the boss from stalling all of us. Eraserhead nodded his head in agreement and moved forward, eyes flaring red and hair lifting as he glared down the boss, who was just staring blandly at them. Go Deku, it'll be okay with 𝗵𝗲𝗄, I promise. He wasn't about to let his students suffer anymore. Not at this moment and not later on if he could help it. Go 𝗵𝗲𝗄, that's an order, go and protect them. He leapt forward, meeting Overhaul with his knife. The man huffed as he ducked down, avoiding the slice to the shoulder he would have received. Eraserhead, your quirk would be beneficial for my research, why don't you come with us? An order more than anything and one he would ignore fully. I don't think so. Not after you've hurt my student and that girl. He lashed his foot out, connecting with the other man and sent him rolling across the ground. He needed to blink again. There wasn't a choice in this. He'd have to wait for the recharge as well. A fully 15 seconds now compared to the one it used to be. I see that you've lost some of your use of that quirk, the man stated as he got up into a crouch, hand on the ground as his eyes narrowed. That attack on the USJ must have done more than anyone had thought. He growled as he leapt off to the side, avoiding spikes that would have impaled him. Chisaki, we need to move before they regroup, Chronostasis said as he appeared next to his boss, Shin appearing next in his full black getup. No, not without Eri and the gem, Overhaul stated as he stood up. Chrono, take on Eraserhead for me, try and capture him if you can. Shin, I'm going to have to borrow you and your abilities for a little bit. He reached a hand out and laid a hand on the black-clothed individual. But of course, boss, whatever you need. Shin bowed his head before his entire body broke apart into small pieces and then joined into Overhaul's, making a monstrous construct. Aizawa wished his recharge period hadn't lengthened, but he didn't have a choice in it, not after overusing it while healing and causing damage unwarily. Eri, precious gem, you know you can't run away. Overhaul's voice echoed all around the chamber just as Eraserhead had to dodge a tendril of white hair from the second in command. I'll kill these heroes and then I'll make sure your punishments are horrendous if you don't come here now. Bullet Deku, you can't, 𝗵𝗲𝗄 stated as he held the boy in place. His shoulders had automatically curled as his legs twitched underneath him. It was obvious that Deku had suffered here greatly, even for the short week they had taken to prepare the raid, and so had been conditioned somewhat. You have to ignore him and get out of here with the girl. Both of you can't stay here. The boy trembled underneath the older teen's hands as he shook his head, unable to move. It was obvious that he was struggling to do as he was told by his sensei and 𝗵𝗲𝗄, but now his body was refusing to do as it was told. They needed to leave and get the girl out, like yesterday. But 𝗵𝗲𝗄 also knew that he was the only one that could honestly take out Overhaul and not be blown to bits, aside from Eraserhead at least, so he needed to stay and help. Only he wasn't sure he could protect Deku and fight at the same time. He was strong, right up there with some pros he knows because Sir said so, but that didn't mean that he could take on such a powerful villain. He was still learning and getting better every day, but that didn't mean he was ready to do this kind of fight just yet. He should leave it to the more experienced heroes and remove the down comrade and civilian. Only said comrade and civilian were both terrified and frozen to the spot they had fallen to. Come Eri, precious gem, you know that I'll just come and take you, Overhaul continued to say as he stepped forward, swatting away one of Sir's weighted stamps. Make it easy and come to me and we'll leave without me killing anyone. 𝗵𝗲𝗄 gritted his teeth as he got in front of the two in a crouch. He couldn't allow this villain to take either one of them, he just couldn't. I don't think so, he stated as he pulled at the clasps on his cape and pulled it over, laying it over Deku and Eri. You two just stay here and out of the way, he stated with a smile as green and red eyes looked up at him in terror. You'll be okay. It helped that his cape was fire and waterproof, though he had wished they'd made it bulletproof too, but he didn't have enough hair at the time to add on that feature safely. With the two covered in his cape, he turned back to Overhaul with a bright smile on his face before disappearing into the floor. He had trained extensively with Sir and so knew exactly where Overhaul was located, the man too confident in himself to move, which made him an easy target. He'd have to be quick and sure as he moved, otherwise he could be blown apart if that man managed to touch him. With that, he slipped into the ground before reappearing right in front of a stunned Overhaul, slamming a fist into his face. Power. He hoped that Izuku would take the time to get out of there and away from the danger. He couldn't afford to stop and protect the defenseless too. It would be just too much of a distraction when he had to face against Overhaul. His quirk flared as he watched Overhaul's arms swing at him, passing through his head harmlessly before he dropped into the ground, using physics to power up his attack. He wasted not a moment before he reappeared, a knee in the villain's gut that was followed by a hit to the face. He smirked as he allowed the stamp from Sir to slide through his body and into Overhaul's shoulder, knocking him off balance. You remember your training, 𝗵𝗲𝗄, Sir called out as he appeared next to the teen, sending a kick of his own out that said blonde quickly followed to double-team the villain. Use all that you've learned to take this man down. Don't keep hiding from me, you two. You know what'll happen if you don't obey me. The blonde really didn't want to know what would happen if the two disobeyed and then recaptured. He'd have to make sure that didn't happen. 𝗵𝗲 could only smile at this point and power through all of this with his mentor. Yes, sir, he agreed as he proceeded to do just that with the 𝗃𝗏 #1 sidekick at his own side now. He would never understand how All Might could let Sir go like he did. But he was also thankful for it because it allowed him to intern underneath the man. He had learned so very much from the man, and he hoped that he would continue to learn from him. He has so much to learn and understand from this man. He was so excited to continue to do so until he was a full-grown hero that would make this man so very proud. He wasn't going to waste a second while being at Sir's side. Precious gem, bring Yuri, obey me and come to me before I kill someone. Overhaul was getting frustrated. 𝗵𝗲 could tell from the way his voice got rougher and deeper. He assumed Deku was still hiding in place under his cape where he left him. No matter what happens, 𝗵𝗲, know that the mission is paramount. Capture Overhaul and retrieve the civilians. Sir reiterated once more as he leapt back away from a spike of earth, another going straight through 𝗵𝗲's own before he leapt forward to land a punch. No matter what, 𝗵𝗲, do what I trained you for. Fine, that was the last warning gem. Someone dies now. Overhaul slammed a hand into the ground with his mutated and grotesque arm. Sir, yes sir, the blonde yelled in excitement before disappearing underground. By the time he reappeared above ground with a fist in Overhaul's face, bright blue eyes widening as he heard the shout of pain behind him, Sir had a large piece of earth piercing into his right side where his shoulder and arm once connected. Then the ceiling collapsed. Bullet, his entire body was shaking, so hard that he was knocking his head against the ground even as Yuri blocked most the rest of it from even getting near it. His arms held on tight around the little girl as her own locked tightly around his neck, both absolutely terrified about what was happening behind them. The red cape protected them from the view of the battle, but the sounds of fighting was still loud and clear. 𝐈𝐧𝐿 was making Chrono curse and yell, obviously the white-masked man unable to keep up and get out of sight of his sensei's sight. Not to mention his sensei was an expert at close combat despite being an ambush hero, so he could hold his own without too much of a struggle against someone like Chrono. Rocklock was trying to get a lock on the other man so that Eraserhead could finally knock him out of the running. The fight between 𝗵𝗲, Sir Nighteye, and Overhaul sounded like it was going well in their favor, but Overhaul was still talking. It made the two shake even harder as they imagined the torture they would go through if the villain got his way and got the two of them once more. The explosions of their bodies as they were overhauled was excruciating, and then to be put back together. There had been several times where they had to be resuscitated because they either lost too much blood or something had occurred when they were put back together. Neither enjoyed the broken ribs and sternum when that occurred, but Izuku guessed it was better than being dead. At least in theory it was. Now though, he almost wished that neither of them survived thanks to the utter pain they had experienced and gone through. Death would have been a mercy. Now though, there was no choice but to try and survive and live. He knew this, knew he had to get up and run away, stop being a liability for the heroes that were fighting in front of them and within the hideout. They were too much of a danger to themselves and others by just sitting there doing nothing. Yet, Izuku could not get his body to move. It shook and trembled, but he couldn't climb to his feet to run away. He couldn't even move to adjust the cape so that he could see what was going on, to try and dodge attacks coming for them. Fine, that was the last warning gem. Someone dies now. Izuku shook harder as the Yakuza boss yelled, and the Greenette believed every word that was said, more so when he heard the pained yell of Sir Nighteye and the horror filled on from 𝗵𝗲. Then he heard the crack of something above. Deku, move. The absolute desperation from his sensei made his entire body tense and move on its own, without his thoughts or input into the action. Lightning crackled around his entire body. Yuri's horn lit up. Shattered Deku wasted not a moment as he leapt to the side, grabbed hold of the elongated arm, and then watched as it disintegrated and Overhaul was separated from Shin. He blinked for a long moment as he looked at the two separated before looking over his shoulder where Yuri's horn was glowing brightly. He couldn't waste too much time though because there was a fuzzy feeling in the back of his head that made him move. He felt his legs shatter from the power he used, but then there was no pain and he was still able to stand. His eyes landed on the form of one of the expendables, the one that could absorb life energy and use it as his own, falling to the ground of the base. Ryukyu wasted no time in jumping on him with Uravity and Froppy right behind her. The fuzzy feeling appeared in the back of his head once more and he jumped up high into the air, watching as spikes of earth shoot up from where he had been standing a moment ago. His legs felt wobbly, but he landed firmly on the ground before leaping once more, avoiding more spikes of earth. Leave them alone, 𝗵𝗲 shouted as he shot forward, slamming a fist into Overhaul's face, knocking his mask onto the ground. You two belong to me, Chisaki shouted as he ducked under a kick, hands slamming into the ground and shattering it into pieces all around him. 𝗵𝗲 was forced to retreat with a scowl on his face, going through all the broken pieces of concrete that surrounded them. Get over here now or I'll kill everyone here. Izuku's entire body jerked, as if he was about to follow that order and move towards the man, but then he shook his head and leapt further away. He would not allow himself and Eri to be taken back to the villain. He would rather have the two of them die before he did that, because what awaited them was worse than death. The fuzzy feeling appeared and he was able to dodge the white arrow that was heading for his back just in time. Shit, Chrono growled just as Rocklock touched his jacket, sticking the man in place. Fuck, Overhaul. Get out of here. You can get them later. Shut it, you. Aizawa growled as he slammed a fist into the man's head, knocking him out completely. Deku, take the girl and get out of here. Head for the hole up there. Eraserhead pointed at said hole and the boy didn't hesitate. He trusted his teacher, so he pushed himself upwards, feet barely touching the ground as his legs shattered over and over as Eri healed him over and over again. Gem, I'm coming for you, Overhaul shouted as he ran towards the body of his large minion, hands laying on the man, and soon he was combining with him. This is not over and you and Eri will not get away. Not a goddamn chance, Eraserhead shouted as his eyes flared and Overhaul was soon falling apart from the minion and on the ground. You think I'd let you get anywhere near my student after this? You're dead wrong, he growled as he kept his eyes wide open and slammed into the Yakuza boss into the ground, only to be knocked away from the boss's shin slammed his entire body into the hero. Get them, boss. Make your dream a reality, the man yelled as he continued to struggle against Eraserhead, keeping the man down the best he could. He's not going anywhere, Rocklock growled as he reached for Overhaul to freeze his jacket into place. If he could just lay a single finger on the man's clothes or equipment, he'd be able to freeze him into place and stop him from there. I don't think so, Overhaul growled as his hand laid onto the hero's wrist, meeting the wide, terrified eyes of the other man with a terrifying grin of his own. Now then, suffer. He wasted not a second to blow the hero's arm completely apart. The scream caught everyone's attention as Rocklock went down, holding a hand to the place his arm once connected to, blood pooling all around him as he squirmed on the ground in pain. Now, Gem, return to me, he ordered as he looked up at the ceiling where Izuku was standing at the edge of the hold, Eri still on his back. Come back and I might be kind enough to return this hero's arm. Don't think just because one of us are down, that we're all down. Lemillion appeared, swinging his leg to catch the other man in the side. You're all like cockroaches, appearing from the crevices everywhere. Overhaul reached for the leg, only to growl as it went through him and he was instead hit with a punch to the side of his head. Get the hell away from me, he screamed as he managed to summon more spikes before raising a platform up to the hole where Deku and Eri stood watching for the moment. Deku moved further away from the hole as Overhaul appeared above ground, terror gripping him as he held tightly to Eri, both of their quirks flaring at full power. He shook his head as Eri whimpered. We need to go back, the little girl whispered as her hold tightened on the older teen. We have to go back or he'll kill them all. Except Deku knew that if they went back, then everyone would die regardless. He and Eri would die in the end. He could not allow them to go back to Overhaul no matter what. All of this would be in vain if he did. But that in mind, he leapt away, ignoring how his body broke and then rewound with each leap, knowing that it would only hurt for a second before being returned to his original state. He knew that if he couldn't get Eri to stop her quirk, then he would have to eventually drop her so that he wouldn't disappear. But that was later. Right now he had to dodge the pieces of rocks that were trying to form around him and Eri, trying to trap him in place. A few were pointed and Deku knew that if he got stabbed, he'd be stuck into place. Even with Eri's ability to reverse the damage, it would hold him in place long enough for Overhaul to get to him. He couldn't allow that. With that in mind, he continued to dodge. And when he couldn't do that, he knocked the pieces away from him and instead towards Overhaul to keep him away. My precious Gem, do you really think you can get away from me? The man questioned as his lips turned into a vicious smirk, hands hanging low to the ground, ready to slam down and use his quirk. He belonged to me, just as Eri belongs to me. And between us we can rid the world of all the disease in this world. Izuku gulped and shook his head. There was no way in hell that was happening. Either way, if you don't give Eri to me, you'll disappear and that would be quite the waste, he stated as he stood up fully, leant on the one foot as he held his hand out. You know she has no control. She'll erase you from existence if you don't. Yeah, no I don't think so. Lemillion slammed a punch into the man's gut, sending him rolling across the ground and away from the two. You're not touching either one of them ever again, he roared as Eraserhead, Uravity and Froppy appeared behind him. This ends here. Go now, before I have to blink, the teacher yelled as his hair flared up around his head. His two students and the older one moved almost in sync, surrounding the villain. This isn't over, Overhaul screamed as he scrambled up onto his feet. No, this is over. Lemillion moved and grabbed the man by one of his arms, twisting it so that it was up behind his back and then forcing him to his knees. Get me the quirk suppressant cuffs, he growled and held his hands out. He couldn't safely carry them with his costume due to the makeup of the equipment, so he had to have someone else give him a pair. No problem there, Uravity stated as she handed over the cuffs and watched as they were quickly placed on the older man. Main objective captured. Ribbit. We'll report to Eraserhead and the police up here and wait for further instructions afterwards. 𝗵𝗃 spoke into her calm, the voice of Ryukyu replying a moment later. Affirmative. I'll meet up with you two soon enough. Nighteye-chan will be making an appearance to join you as well soon. Copy, Ribbit. With that, the two moved over towards Eraserhead, who was busy applying some of his eye drops to his eyes. What now, sir? We'll gather up the rest of the villains and criminals with the police. Any injured will report to the paramedics and EMTs, he explained as he stood up fully, preparing to turn towards the problem child and the girl. I'll be taking Deku and the girl to the hospital personally. Screams ripped through the air and everyone in the area turned to stare at the pair, letting out gut-wrenching sounds. Deku was on his hands and knees, screaming as green lightning mixed and flare with golden streaks shoot from the girl. His eyes were glowing a bright green and her eyes were shining pure white. Both were screaming as both their quirks went berserks. Shit, Eraserhead growled as he activated his quirk once more, glaring at the two children and hoping that whatever was happening would stop. It did. Both children fell forward towards the ground, panting heavily and cheeks flushed with fever and sweat. Deku was able to keep his hands up though, keeping the girl from falling onto the ground and potentially hurting herself more. We need an ambulance over here, Eraserhead shouted as he ran over to the pair. The other students on his heels the entire way. Shattered, he had expected trauma from the problem child. There was no avoiding it when the kid willingly went back to a dangerous situation where his body was torn to pieces again and again. He expected the kid to be wary of touch and most likely male adults that would want to lay hands on him or the girl for any reason, even if it wasn't threatening. What he hadn't expected was for the child to growl and glare at anyone that came near him or the girl with any medical equipment. Aizawa sighed as he looked at the problem child. Both children had cooling patches on their foreheads to help with their fevers settled in his lap as the two went over a book and he silently pointed at images and made the hand sign that went with the image. It was slow going, but Eri was learning how to sign and communicate with Izuku, which made the both of them rather happy as the teen still was not talking. The two had been in the hospital for a couple of days, both having been hooked up to IVs when they were unconscious, stuffed full of antibiotics, fluids, and fever reducers the entire time. Though all that effort had almost gone to waste when they had woken up and panicked at having been separated from the other. Thankfully, Aizawa had been there to reunite the two and they hadn't been separated since, though that had brought the new challenge up of trying to treat them properly. Both had left their IVs and after a bit of convincing on the teacher's end. But further treatment had been stalled. Both panicked at the sight of needles or probes of any sort, even panicking at the sight of an oximeter device on one memorable occasion. He would have thought the problem child would have been able to handle the situation. But apparently the treatment of Overhaul was much worse than he had thought. I don't know what to do at this point, he admitted as he looked at the two, watching Midori assign the word apple to the girl, pointing at the picture. Aizawa would say the word once in a while if the girl didn't know what the item was, but otherwise he left them alone. Maybe we should call his mother in, Toshinori suggested from his place next to the man, having arrived not too long after the entire bunch showed up to the hospital. He had spent most of his time visiting Mirai and making sure the man was adjusting to only having one arm and the knowledge that he had lost a good chunk of his ribcage as well. Just to spite the man a little bit, he had suggested he retire due to his injuries. The glare was worth the scolding of hypocrite he gotten. I think we probably should. The underground hero rubbed at the bridge of his nose, hating to have to agree with the retired hero. She seems to be able to comfort him in a way we never will be able to. All Might nodded as he pulled out his phone. Why did we even wait in bringing her in again? They should have known better, but it had been suggested by the commission that they hold off on calling the woman, which honestly should have been a red flag to begin with. Something about acclimating them to a safe place before introducing other variables that could destabilize their condition. Aizawa rolled his eyes at the reminder of the incompetence of the Hero Commission, or the fact that they were probably trying to wrangle this whole situation in a way to benefit them. It could have been Eri and her quirk they wanted, but that took time to do, something that Nezu had already beaten them to as he had placed the care of the child in Aizawa's hands. Toshinori held the phone up to his ear and it took only 2 rings to answer. Hello Inko, I'm sorry it took so long to get a hold of you, but Izuku has been retrieved from the Yakuza and we have him situated here at the hospital. He hummed again before nodding to himself. I can't say he wasn't hurt during this whole thing, but he'd currently in one piece and healthy, no visible injuries, and no change in his body aside from what was noticed before. The silence grew for a long moment before he said he goodbyes and hung up his phone. She'll be here soon. She already has permission from her boss to take off, so it shouldn't be long. Good, maybe she can help her kid out a bit. They turned to see the 2 kids practicing their JSL further, both calm and at peace for the time being. Shattered. Izuku, you'll have to eat too, Inko urged as she pushed the tray back to her son, who scrunched his nose at the hospital food. Eri watched with curious eyes as she nibbled at the apple slices that had been on her own plate. You can't just stop eating like this, you'll never get out of here. The boy pouted as he made his hands move, making the woman sigh. I don't care if the food is unappetizing. You have to eat something. Now eat or I'll take away your chocolate chip cookies. He huffed but picked up his spork to dig into the rice and miso soup. 𝐭𝐸 nodded her head triumphantly before turning to the little girl that had not moved from her son's lap since she had entered the room. Now Eri, what signs has Izuku taught you? She questioned the girl as she signed her words as she spoke. She knew the girl probably didn't know a whole lot, but it would help further her knowledge if she signed and talked at the same time. The little girl nabbed another apple slice as she thought over the words, taking a moment to take a bit of her slice, before signing the word for apple to the woman. 𝐭𝐸 laughed at that before nodding her head in encouragement. That was a good one. We'll have you talking with your hands in no time. She turned over to her bag, pulling out a little child's book, filled with words and the signage of those words. I brought this along to help keep you from being bored. This same book helped Izuku learn how to sign, so I figured it would help you. Izuku's face lit up at the book and his hands began to fly together as he rambled along, his mother laughing the entire way. Calm down, Izuku, I can't follow that quickly. She continued to giggle even as she opened the book for her and Eri to go through together, once in a while nudging her son to eat his meal while Eri continued to eat her own unprompted. Shattered, thank the gods we called you in, a nurse muttered as she looked at the plump woman in front of her. The few days we had him and her by themselves, it was near impossible to get either of them to do anything. He was hard to get to eat anything and she wouldn't leave his lap for anything. She ran a hand over her face as she sighed tiredly. I'm so sorry, my son can be rather stubborn when he wants. 𝐭𝐸 gave a soft chuckle as she held one cheek in hand while the other waved at the nurse. I'll be in and out while they're here, so feel free to call me if you need help to get them to do something. I won't mind one bit. The nurse gave a bright smile at that and an overeager nod. Of course, I would be more than happy to do that when we need help. Now if you don't mind accompanying me, we need to flush their IVs and go over their vitals once more. But of course, lead the way. I'll be more than happy to keep them calm while you do that. The women walked into the room to stare at the two children, both drawing pictures together. Eri for once was on the bed in front of her own little table while Izuku was leant against the back of the bed with his sketch pad perched against his thighs. Hey you two, we've got a few things to do and then we'll see about getting you some ice cream afterwards. The little girl and teen gave wary looks to each other and then the nurse, already knowing that they would be unable to fight against whatever 𝐭𝐸 was about to get them to do. Neither would honestly pitch a huge fit, but they would fight against the medical procedures that were so similar to Overhaul and his experiments. Izuku gave a huff before setting his sketchbook aside and dragging Eri back onto his lap, turning to look at the two women expectantly. This is only going to take a moment, the nurse said as she pulled out several alcohol wipes and 2 syringes full of saline flush. No worries, dears. This shouldn't hurt at all, 𝐭𝐸 assured as she sat with the two, easily holding each arm with the IV so that the nurse could flush it out real quick. It only took a moment, and soon both kids were watching the nurse leave the room before turning to 𝐭𝐸 expectantly. She gave them each a smile and nodded her head. I did say something about ice cream, so I'll go get that real quick. You two behave and when I get back, we'll enjoy our little treat. Shattered, I'd like to ask you something, Aizawa said from his place on the wall, watching Izuku color in a coloring book with Eri. The two had clung so tightly to each other since their rescue that he wasn't sure if separating them anytime soon would do any good. What would that be? 𝐭𝐸 questioned as she peeled an apple. Eri had taken such a liking to the fruit that 𝐭𝐸 made sure there was a basket full of them, of all kinds that the girl could enjoy at any time she pleased. It helped that the little girl would make Izuku eat a few pieces along with her whenever she did eat some of the apple. Would you be willing to live on campus for a while? He scratched the back of his head as he looked down at the floor. We got the results of Midoriya's psych eval and, well, he'd be restricted to just training for a long while. No work studies or internships for a long time, he explained as he sighed. Not to mention that some of the symptoms he's already having of PTSD from this whole thing is rather concerning, which has been helped by my presence for both Izuku and Eri. She added on as she cut the apple, quickly turning the slices into bunnies. It would give the kids something to converse about and a new way to introduce food to Eri. I've noticed that he's been doing better with me here and Eri has responded well because of that. 𝐭𝐸 had always known that Izuku strived to be a good citizen and role model for younger kids, so using Eri to make him eat also had the benefit of showing the little girl it was okay to eat as well. They were helping each other out quite a bit and 𝐭𝐸 only encouraged that. Aizawa nodded in agreement. There's also the problem of integrating Midoriya back into classes with his classmates. He ran a hand through his hair as he thought back to when the year had just started and what Midoriya had been like back then. At the start of the year, Midoriya was skittish and shy around his classmates, never initiating touch and flinching at loud noises. Over the year, he had improved greatly and had rarely reacted to loud noises or fast movements unless it was from Bakugo. Yes, my son had indeed gained quite the confidence. I even met several of his friends when they came to the apartment after school and all were so well behaved and kind. 𝐭𝐸 agreed, but she also knew where this was going. I'm assuming after his time with the villains while protecting Eri. He has regressed back to those habits of before. The doctors have stated as much. Trauma response and PTSD, none of which is his fault, but something I wish I could have stopped from happening. He knew already that nothing he said would have kept Midoriya from going back to helping that little girl, comforting her, and being at her side until they could form their rescue to get them out. Now though, those trauma responses he had at the start of the year were back, and 10 times worse than before. Because of that, I'm afraid reintegration into his classes are going to be tougher than I actually expect. Most likely they will. But holding him back is only going to make it all worse. 𝗏𝐻 finished cutting the last bunny before setting them all onto the plate, opening a small bag of pretzel sticks and setting them on there as well. There was a little bowl of peanut butter for the two to use as well. A healthy snack that she knew both children would enjoy. I've learned that the hard way myself, especially before his quirk came in so late. I gave him no support and no encouragement in his pursuit of being a hero. I wasn't really the greatest mother out there, but I tried my best. Aizawa flinched at the mention of Midoriya being quirkless, his mind flashing back towards the notebooks that the boy had written. He couldn't even begin to understand the utter torment he had been through, especially if his own mother hadn't supported him in his endeavors. Hopefully between the two of us now, he'll have more than enough support, Aizawa stated as he straightened up. He couldn't change the past, but he could try and make the future easier to handle. Sounds like a plan then. I'll have my things packed up for a while. It helps that UA is close to the law firm I work at. 𝗏𝐻 nodded in the end as she finished off the platter with bottles of juice, 1 apple and 1 grape. Just email me the details and have a room set up for me. I think we'll be good after that. Aizawa sighed in relief as he nodded his head and pulled his phone out. He'd make sure that 𝗏𝐻 would have full access to her son's room and her son would share his apartment with Eri. At why the distance between the two would be minimized at least a little bit. He'd still have a key to the rooms just in case, just like 𝗏𝐻 would. But at least the two wouldn't be forced to separate and Izuku would return to the dorms to his own familiar space. It would provide at least a little bit of comfort for the teen and the little girl. A space that was their own with minimal possible entry by individuals they didn't trust. Shattered, the two settled into the dorm much easier than Aizawa thought they would. Might have something to do with 𝗏𝐻, Yamada, Nimuri, and Yagi though. The 4 of them having teamed up to welcome the two back into the teachers' dorms and then made it apparent that they were more than welcome to join them whenever, or to hide away when needed. This meant that Izuku could sit on the couch with a sketchbook and Eri could play on the floor with dolls that 𝗏𝐻 and Nimuri had gifted her. Yagi had given her little onesie outfits that were modeled after very prominent heroes, and Yamada had given both nothing but blankets galore. The entire common area and the teens' dorm room were covered in blankets of all sorts, but it seemed to help the two to sink into the comfort of the dorms. Though Izuku's reintegration back into the classroom was going much harder than the teacher thought it should. Even with his mother being on school grounds in the morning and late evening wasn't abating the boy's anxiety during the in-between. Not even remaking an appearance at lunch seemed to help a lot, outside of getting the kid to eat something. No, the classes seemed to stress him out and his hands were always twitching. He had tried to sketch at first, with his sketchbook next to his notebook, but most of his teachers had asked him to put it away and informed Aizawa of the situation. They had even tried a fidget toy, but many of the teachers felt it more distraction than help and had asked to have it put away during lectures. Not even Aizawa explaining the situation helped because many of them believed to be right about it being a distraction, except for Hisashi and Nimuri, who allowed the toys for all the students because it calmed them down and made them focus. But not all teachers were on the same wavelength, and they deserved to have their ways respected unless it caused actual harm. The ban on fidgets in their classrooms wasn't harming anyone, truly, just limiting the ability to express anxious energy healthily during those periods. Aizawa needed to find a way to get the kid something that would help with his anxiety, or else he would burst in the middle of a class and truly be harmed by all of this. It was already making him jumpy and skittish with his classmates. His anxiety and senses ramped up to sense danger to himself or anyone around him. He flinched at simple movements that weren't near him and just about jumped out of his seat at every out-of-place noise. It wasn't healthy and it was just getting worse without an outlet. He remembered before that there had been no real complaints at the start of the year when Izuku had his analysis notebooks out. He'd write in those and then write in his normal notebook, which wasn't a huge deal. It probably actually looked like he was just writing more notes in class instead of something else. Easily hidden, and it gave the kid something to do to soothe his anxiety. The only thing was that he hadn't actually seen any of those analysis notebooks since they had moved into the dorms and Nezu had wanted to see them. He wondered what happened there. He'd have to talk to either Midoriya or Nezu to figure that out, when he had time that he just didn't at the moment. But for now he'd have to just allow the kid the chance to decompress during his classes. He ignored the sketchbooks and fidgets, made sure the kid got a jelly pouch whenever he passed by because he knew he wasn't eating as much as he should, and then made sure that he knew he had a place to hide during lunch or other periods that didn't work out very well. He'd had the boy hide out in his office more than once during ectoplasms or 𝗵𝗲𝗃 classes, two of the teachers that refused his sketchbook or fidget toys. Though he knew this couldn't last. It just couldn't last the way it was going. No real outlet for himself to relax and just space out happily in his own little bubble, to let his senses go and for his body to just melt somewhere, which he had wished he had done sooner. Screaming was coming from Midoriya's room, and he had no choice but to use his ki to get in to see what was going on. Eri was on the floor, tears flooding over her cheeks as she watched her caretaker thrash violently with sparks of green flaring all around him. The TV was playing a Pixar movie of a girl with brown curly hair singing around what seemed to be her family. Kid must have fallen asleep during the movie and Eri had just let him, thinking no harm of it. The screaming proved them all wrong. This was the most noise the teacher had heard from the kid since Overhaul, and go figure it would be from a nightmare. He went to flare his quirk, but froze when suddenly the kid's entire body seemed to be encased in the green lightning and something black seemed to squirm out from his skin and around him. He didn't waste another second to activate his quirk, and soon the kid was slammed up onto the couch, sweat pouring down his face as his quirk came to a complete stop. "Midoriya," Aizawa called firmly, moving slowly so that he could come between Eri and the still panting and terrified teen. "Midoriya, can you look at me? God damn it. It wasn't time for 𝗏𝗏 to have returned yet, and he'd have to figure this out on his own. Is ... is he hurting?" Eri whispered as she inched closer to the couch behind Aizawa, her little hand reaching out towards the one person that had been with her through so much. She hated seeing him hurt like this, but there was very little she could do to make it better. It was always him making her feel better. Aizawa gulped but nodded his head. There was no logical reason to lie to the little girl about the situation. Yeah, he's hurting, but just like you, he'll have help," he explained lowly as he slowly made his way so that he was in Midoriya's sight instead of out of it. The boy's eyes whipped to stare at him as soon as he could the teacher's movements and stayed on him. "I'm here to help Midoriya," he stated to both the little girl and the teen. "Please," she pleaded as the tears continued to fall down her face, her hand landing on the side of the couch so that she could look up at the other in fear and concern. "Please be okay," she hiccuped, the sound catching the teen's attention, and those large emerald eyes landed on the girl. "I don't want you to hurt anymore," she gasped out. Izuku gulped as his hands, shaking and covered in sweat, reached out towards the little girl and taking her into his arms before looking back to his teacher. The little girl buried her head into his neck and clutched at him like an octopus, Aizawa knowing she would not be removed easily if at all. "It's okay, Midoriya," Aizawa stated as he kept a hand raised out towards the teen, to let him know he wasn't a danger. He wasn't a little girl and so knew not to take anything at face value right now, not when the boy could turn and attack just as fast as protect. "It's just you, me, and Eri here, no one else." He waved a hand behind him to show the empty room with that movie still playing. The teen gulped again before taking a shaky breath and giving just as shaky nod. His hands moved to sign behind Eri's back, but his movements were so jerky and shaky that Aizawa couldn't tell what he was trying to say. "Don't worry about explaining. You don't have to right now. Just try and breathe. Try and get Eri to breathe with you. Both of you aren't getting enough oxygen with all that gasping and hiccuping." He gave a rueful smirk at that, but nodded encouragement to the teen before taking a deep breath himself. It took a few times of mimicking his teacher, but soon enough, the teen was taking deep calming breaths and Eri was dozing on his shoulder once calming herself. "Good job. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened," Izuku signed once his hands had calmed down sufficiently to actually get his signs to show. "I just started a movie for us to watch, and then nightmares are like that. They happen to everyone, especially heroes," Aizawa stated calmly as he waved away the boy's worried expression. "You've got major PTSD and trauma to go through with Hound Dog. And it hasn't even been a month since the Overhaul BS. You have to give yourself time to heal. But I can't just let it control me like this." He had furrows between his brows and a frown on his face, his arms loose around her even as he kept her against his chest. "Heroes can't be weak like this. Heroes, more than anything, are human beings that need help like everyone else. We suffer trauma and face fears just like everyone else. We suffer injuries and setbacks just like everyone else. Just because you had a setback and are taking time to get back on your feet, that doesn't make you weak, problem child. That makes you anything but weak." He reached a hand out, pausing until he got a nod from the kid, and laid it onto his shoulder in comfort. "That makes you strong because I know some veteran heroes that have retired after everything that they've gone through, similar to your own situation, and they couldn't even return to a normal life afterwards. Not where you are back in school, helping in the care of Eri, and continuing your training to be a hero. So no, just because you're having a setback and are struggling to get back on your feet, that doesn't make you any less of a hero." He paused for a moment before tilting his head towards the little girl in the teen's arms. "I don't think she thinks of you as anything but her hero, no matter how hurt you are right now. If anything, she thinks you're even stronger of a hero that'll continue to protect her, even now, away from Overhaul." Izuku blinked furiously as he looked down to Eri, trying to keep the tears from flooding down his face again. He coughed as his throat itched at the use of his voice, but he shook his head and tried again. I don't. Wan wanted to disappoint her. Aizawa gave a soft smile as he raised his hand and gave that curly hair a good ruffle, ignoring how the kid leaned up into the touch for once. I don't think you could even if you never spoke again, kid. That's what it means to be someone's hero. He ignored the tears that fell down the kid's face but accepted the soft thank you sensei that he got. It wasn't a great improvement or anything, but it was a start, and that was something. Find your way. The two stared at each other, waiting for the other to move, neither wanting to make the first attempt. Emerald and dark brown eyes stared and stared and stared. The scratch of a crayon on paper echoed in the room as Eri continued to color in front of Izuku, ignoring the stare down at the moment, concentrating on the masterpiece she was making. She wasn't affected by the tension that her current guardian was exuding in the presence of the therapist, only interested in drawing. Not that Hound Dog minded all that much. No, the problem was that the little green bean was being stubborn and not communicating during their sessions. This was the third one since their return to the school grounds. But the kid was refusing to communicate in any form, not even JSL was being utilized. He wasn't sure how he could help the kid if the kid wasn't willing to open up to him even on something as simple as how his morning had been going. Before the whole Yakuza thing, Izuku had been doing mandatory therapy and was doing well. He had gone over several different traumatic events and he had been moving forward. They had even gotten onto the subject of his relationship with Bakugo and the course of actions they could take to help prevent too much interaction. Though Izuku had made it clear that he didn't want to have the other boy moved out of the class and he himself wasn't going anywhere either. Something that Hound Dog did not agree with. He wanted to have a healthy separation of the two, but Izuku had made it clear that nothing like that would happen. Because he's got friends now, actual friends that are helping him be better. He had explained, even as he twiddled his fingers together and looked off to the side. Hound Dog shook his head as he returned back to the present. At the moment, Izuku's selflessness when it came to Bakugo wasn't what they needed to talk about. They needed to talk about the present problems. The PTSD had worsened during his time with the Mafia. He didn't want to be touched by near anyone, except for his mother and Eri. He flinched at loud sounds and he could hardly look at his classmate Tokoyami at the moment. He couldn't even return to the common room to be around his friends without Eri somewhere nearby. But he couldn't help if the boy didn't want to talk to him, didn't want help at this time and would only glare at him with those dull-looking jade eyes. He could read the exhaustion and hopelessness in them and he couldn't figure out what to do to help. He glanced down at Eri, who was now drawing a picture of what seemed to be herself and Izuku, both in white clothes and frowns on their faces. Eri, can you tell me about what you're drawing? He needed to change gears and go after a different avenue, something that might bring Izuku up and out to speak once more. It's me and Izuku, Eri stated with a firm nod. She had yet to smile about anything, but with the trauma she had experienced at such a young age, he wasn't surprised. It would take time and effort and for her to be comfortable in her new environment, things that wouldn't happen right away. When we were with Overhaul, we wore matching clothes all the time, she explained as she picked up a red crayon and began to draw a red triangle behind the two. I heard he was a very scary and very bad man. He threw a glance up as Izuku stiffened and the boy sent a glare his way. He hurt you and Izuku a lot. 𝐻𝗵𝗵. She picked up a yellow crayon and added sharp narrowed eyes with the ragged red triangle. I tried to be good. She stopped drawing as she set her crayons down to turn towards Izuku. I'm sorry I wasn't good enough to stop him from hurting you. Tears flooded her eyes as her lips trembled. Well, that wasn't what he wanted to happen, but it was most likely good for her to express either way. He sat back in his chair as he watched the teen instantly soften his entire demeanor and slid onto the ground with her. He pulled her into his arms as the little girl cried out and completely fell into her tears. It'll be all right, Eri. We'll get you through this together, Hound Dog assured as he moved to settle on the floor with them. None of what happened was your fault. He met the dull jade eyes with his own warm brown. It was neither of your faults. FYW, working through Eri seemed to be what was going to happen for the time being. He sighed as he adjusted his legs so they wouldn't be falling numb so fast before he returned his attention back to Eri. They locked you into your room together. He looked over the picture, a small bed with two little lumps covered with a pink blanket. The room itself was dark, but the bed was a bright pink with a little light appearing here and there around it. A safe haven. Overhaul wanted me to have a friend, she explained as she pushed that one away and instead pulled a new clean sheet towards her. I was always alone. I didn't have anyone to talk to. She gave a shrug. We were a control for the other. Izuku signed. A new development after their third session like this. Hound Dog talking to Eri and Izuku clarifying things as they went. Sign was the only way he was communicating and he tried to keep it short. He used us against each other. Did you enjoy having Izuku there with you? A tough question, especially for a little girl that had known exactly what situation she was in at that time. The bad place that caused only hurt and pain. She hummed as she created a scene of the room once more. This time of her and Izuku playing on the floor with blocks and a couple of stick figures that were most likely dolls. I wasn't alone anymore, she whispered sadly. You had someone there to help with a lot of the pain, Hound Dog stated calmly. Knowing the time bomb he was stepping on here. Whatever you went through, he was there to help with it. But but it was. All of it it was bad. Her hands trembled as tears began to fall down her cheeks once more. It was the third week of their meetings, 4 days a week, and this was a normal occurrence now. The little girl held so much pain that just the scent made Hound Dog want to howl in rage and anger. He hurt so much. Izuku gave a sigh as he pulled the little girl onto his lap and settled his head against her head as her face buried into his chest. It was worth it. He signed against her back, eyes meeting the therapist. We were trapped together, we suffered together, and we made it through together. That's something to be proud of, even though the pain is still there, just like how we talked about with Bakugo. You'll continue to feel that pain. It won't just go away, you'll just learn to grow around it. He gave a canine smirk as looked at the two children. You'll both concur this pain and the agony you feel with it eventually. But for now, keep grieving for what you went through and what was lost. There's no timeline on healing. FYW, I don't understand, Hound Dog grumbled as he looked at the pacing teen. Another week had passed and now the cultural festival was about 2 weeks away. Eri and Izuku had made great leaps in their sessions, getting so far as getting Izuku to sign with at least the therapist, his mother, Eri, and Aizawa. What exactly happened to cause you to punch Todoroki of all people? Which was why the teen was currently in front of him. He'd gotten a call from Aizawa, stating he was sending Izuku to him for an emergency session while he dealt with his class, because for some reason, a fight had broken out between 3 of them. Surprisingly, Bakugo wasn't involved in this at all at least not physically at least. No, the fight had broken out between Todoroki, Uraraka, and Izuku. Punches were thrown and screams were exchanged between the 3 friends. Now it was his job to not only find out why but to get Izuku to calm down and try to work through the buttload of emotions he was feeling at this moment, especially with the way that his quirk was currently sparking erratically around him. He hadn't seen that since that once conversation about Bakugo's horrible reasoning and how Izuku felt about that. Whatever had caused this incident and Izuku's current mood, it was almost dead even with mentioning his former bully to him now, not to mention what that bully had done to him in the past. What could his friends that had proven to be more protective and loyal than any other person Izuku's own age has done in his life? We went out, Izuku signed calmly, just to get ice cream. Me, Eri, Todoroki, Uraraka, Kirishima, Kaminari, and present Mike Sensei. Just to give Eri a chance at something different for the day. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration, tugging at the ends to try and ground himself. Knock that off. If you need to mess with something, use this. Hound Dog tossed a hand gripper at the kid, who instantly began to work it in his right hand. Don't resort to physical violence on yourself or others to try and relieve frustration. We've talked about this before. Right. Izuku thought to himself as he looked down at the hand gripper, gripping as tightly as he could before releasing his grip. He started the entire process over once more as he went back to pacing. He had to pocket the gripper when he signed, but that was okay. He could pull it out and use it as needed. We had all ordered something and then Kirishima asked if he could order something for Mina, Zero, and Bakugo as well. Nothing too horrible at all. It was actually really nice of him to think about his friends. He was even going to pay for it himself. Okay, I agree. That was really nice of him to ask and then offer to pay. He was confused. He knew Kirishima had even had several sessions with the boy, but having this starting off with Kirishima was strange. The boy wouldn't start a fight without a good reason. Yeah, right. That's what I thought too. But then Uraraka said that they could just let Bakugo without. He didn't need to have any. Izuku shook his head in irritation. Kaminari said that was a little uncalled for and then Todoroki stated that it really wasn't. That Bakugo really didn't deserve anything nice, just like his dad. Hound Dog watched as the teen's fist closed around the hand gripper so tight that he could hear the device creak ominously. Good thing he had extras if that one was broken. Okay, I'm guessing comparing Bakugo to the current #1 hero wasn't a good thing. There's some things that aren't mine to tell. But when Todoroki stated that, I kinda lost it. He admitted, I shouldn't have punched him or sent Uraraka flying. But I mean, come on. I don't need them doing any of that. Any of what? It sounds like they were just taking pot shots at Bakugo, even without him there. You and I already know that neither of them like the other. He gave a shrug at the raised brow that was sent his way. Yes, I know, understatement. They hate him, and I get why. But I never asked them to try and interfere with anything that has to do with me and Kaken. I mean Bakugo. He huffed as he sat on the couch. They all know what he did to you. I can understand them being overprotective because of that. Hound Dog really could too. He was excessively protective of the staff, viewing them as pack and family all in one. He hated when the news or villains took shots at them and he couldn't do anything about it. It just sounds like they're trying to keep you safe. But they're trying to fight a battle that doesn't concern them. He signed frantically, pent-up anger and frustration finally leaking out. I'm not weak. I've never been weak or incapable. But it seems that since they found out about Bakugo and after the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 stuff, I'm suddenly too weak to protect myself in their eyes. But I'm not. Tears flooded his eyes and he hissed in anger. He hated being an easy crier, tearing up over anything that made him emotional. He didn't want to cry right then. He wanted to be angry. Hound Dog gave a growl as he ran a hand over his shoulders, trying to get the little hairs there to relax. He could see some of the problems the teen was experiencing now, especially concerning the two subjects at hand. They're probably not realizing how they're treating you. They might just think they're trying to protect you. And I get that. Izuku growled himself as he gave a mighty squeeze on the hand gripper, ignoring how the handle bent under his fingers, leaving impressions there. But that doesn't mean they get to take pot shots whenever, especially not just because they're mad on my behalf. I didn't ask for it and I don't want it. And the way they're fighting is just making them into what Bakugo was, a bully. Well, maybe you should talk to them and explain that to them. They're not going to realize how uncomfortable or angry you get over something like that unless you tell them. He offered up. Also, I think you've been bottling things up again. Izuku, have you been journaling like I asked you? Something they had started 2 weeks ago. Something Izuku could do to get his emotions out healthily when exercise wasn't an option. No one wanted the boy to pass out again because he had tried to train to sleep one night, ran himself ragged and was only found because Aizawa did head counts and 2 heads had been missing from the teacher's dorms. Eri had been coloring in the corner when Izuku had passed out, scaring her half to death. The teen gave a guilty look and a shrug. Kinda. I don't like writing about myself or my days, especially if I don't know if Nezu-sensei is going to try and take that one as well. You still haven't had your notebooks returned then. His brows furrowed in concern at that. He had been informed about the notebooks and what information they held, but felt that since only Nezu had been the only one to decode the notebooks, that the boy should have them back. It seemed another visit from him and Aizawa was in order to the principal. Again, no, he hasn't returned them and I'm scared he'll take this one too. Izuku could only admit this because he had come to trust the counselor. Not even Eri knew his fear of the notebook disappearing. Only his mom. Now Hound Dog as well. I'll take care of this with Aizawa. For now, continue writing in that journal. Also, I suggest talking with your friends about what happened and why you did what you did. They should listen to you if they really consider themselves your friends, all right. He stood up and walked over to the door, beckoning the kid over with a wave. Come on, I'll escort you back to the dorms. I'm sure Eri is already bouncing to see you again. This is the first meeting we've had without her after all. Izuku smiled at that and nodded his head in agreement. He was more than ready to be done with the day and return to the little girl that relied on him so heavily and who he relied on so heavily in return. FYW, I heard you almost destroyed your room last night. Not a twitch or even a movement from the teen. He was too busy being curled up in a ball at the moment, Eri currently being snuggled against his side with a stuffed green bunny in her arms. Izuku was hurting, Eri stated solemnly, eyes staying closed as she kept herself up against the teenager. The hound hero nodded his head in agreement even though neither saw him do so. Nightmares were expected, more so now than ever before. He wasn't surprised that this had come up. This wasn't the first time either, the first being the night they had returned. Eri had woken from a nightmare of watching Izuku be torn apart. Her quirk had activated afterwards, and only Aizawa's quick reactions had kept anyone from being rewound before it was too late. I bet he is. I don't think he'll want to talk today either, so how about you and I talk instead, Eri? He can listen to us and maybe that'll help him feel a little better. A distraction was always a good idea to help out, but that didn't mean that this would work. It was worth a try though. What should we talk about? She questioned as her crimson eyes opened to stare at him, curious and hopeful. She was always up for help Izuku out, no matter the problem or whether she could actually help. It was endearing if not a little worrying about how dependent they were becoming of each other. How about your day? What did you do today while Izuku was in his classes? A safe topic that should help ground the teen and give Eri a chance to try and explore the environment more. She had hardly been out of a teacher's sight, let alone Izuku's, so she hadn't really got to experience a lot at the moment outside of a normal day at 𝐒𝐿 came and played with me today, along with his friends from classes. They showed me 𝐿𝐿, karma, dandan, sen dance. She stumbled over the word, one that Hound Dog wasn't really familiar with, and the flapping of her hands over her head didn't make sense to him either. Though from the snort it got from Izuku, maybe he knew what she meant. They also showed me ponies. There's a purple one with wings and a horn like mine, she exclaimed with her hands up in the air. She did magic like me, but it didn't hurt everyone around her. That sounds interesting. Do you know the name of the pony? Something to relate to outside of Izuku and the heroes around her. This could be a very good start. I don't know, she mumbled as she snuggled back into Izuku's side, who slowly wrapped an arm around her shoulders. But there were other ponies too. Normal ponies and ones with wings or with horns. It was really pretty. She twirled her fingers together. Was there anything else? Did you get to color or go outside in poly? Normal child actions, ones he wasn't sure she was able to experience in her time with the Yakuza. Though from what he was able to gather from Izuku, the teen had been able to do some little kid things with her while in prison. We colored and watched the ponies before Izuku came and got me. She finished. It was obvious she was tired, and from where Izuku was looking up from his lap, so was the teen. When can we go? I'm tired. She rubbed at her eyes, yawning at the end as well. It was adorable. Soon, he promised before meeting Izuku's own eyes. Think you can tell me what your dream was about. Now to use this chance to get to Izuku. Even if he didn't want to talk about his dream, at least this way he could say that they tried. The teen looked at him for a long time before sighing and moving his hands into sight. It was during out time with Overhaul, when I was separated from Eri during her experimentations. He started as his face drained of what little color it had. You two were separated from each other rather often, correct? A standard thing to happen with captives. Take away some of the comfort and threaten to keep it that way if they didn't comply. One he was sure was used rather frequently with these two. Yes, Overhaul experimented mostly on Eri. He would occasionally draw blood from me, but he rarely hurt me besides overhauling me. He explained as his hands began to shake. What he did was always worse than overhauling me. I wish he did that more often than what he actually did. What was it that he did? Dear Lord, please tell me that Midoriya Izuku had more done to him than what anyone though. Please tell him that he wasn't about to have the boy sent to Recovery Girl to have blood tests and certain examinations done on him. He wouldn't be able to look Aizawa in the eyes for a long time if that was the case. The teen didn't respond for a long time. One hand running through Eri's hair while the other tugged at his pants for long painful minutes. In my dreams he does horrible things to me. He'll take whatever he wants and leave me nothing behind before tearing me apart and putting me back together just to repeat it all over again. He gulps as he trembles but continues on anyways. In real life, he would just put me in the middle of the room. I could stand or sit, it didn't matter. I'd be the only other person in the room. No furniture or items were in it, just the two of us. You'd be alone with him. No interference or anything from anyone. Please, for the love of God, don't make this into a pedophile and rape case. Please. No one was allowed to. It was just him and I. He wouldn't say anything, but he would take his gloves off and and touch me. It was never sexual, at least, not in the normal way I think. He scrunched up his nose as he thought about how to explain. I always kept my clothes on and he never tried to touch me in my in my privates or anything. He'd just run his hands through my hair or over my face and arms. He'd even rub at my back for a while before he'd leave with his gloves back on. So, just so I'm clear with this, there was no sexual touches or him trying to force himself on you. That was a clarification he needed to have. Non-consensual touching was one thing. Rape was a whole other story. No, never. It was just weird. I know he took x-rays of my feet, probably because of the extra toe joint, as well as x-rays of my jaw and abdomen. That made Hound Dog blink in confusion for a second before shrugging. It wasn't super important at this moment, but he'd card it for later thought. Okay, so non-consensual touching, and you mentioned your dreams were a lot worse than just that. Can you go into depth with that? You don't have to, but as I've said before, it helps to talk about it. He leaned back in his seat to give a sense of space and allowed the teen to think about it. This had to be a willing thing to talk about, not just something he tried to force. It wouldn't help if he forced it. My dreams are of that room. Just the two of us, just like normal. But then he'd take his gloves off and start off with the normal touches. A touch to my hair, my jaws, my shoulders, and backs. His hands clenched together or a moment before he released them to continue. Then he'd start going lower, to my chest and stomach, and the first few times he tried to touch my thighs, I'd wake up. After a few times, he'd move to my knees and down to my ankles where he'd grab those and rip them up. I'd slam my head onto the ground. Silence for a long while, Eri just sitting there and leaning into the big brother figure she had adopted and who had adopted her in turn. Hound Dog watched the two for a long moment, allowing the teen to gather his thoughts. He'd let him take as long as he needed, as this was a lot more than they had gotten in a while, focusing more on Eri the past couple of sessions. I'd look at the ceiling or a long time as he'd run his fingers down the tops of my feet before running them along the bottom. Then he'd come to my little toes. Here he puts his hands on his feet and holds tight to where his little toes are, eyes and jaw clenched tightly. Breath. Izuku, come on now, count with me. 4, 3, 2, 1 and hold for 8, 7, 6, 5. He brings Izuku through the counting for several minutes as he tries to figure out what was happening in that dream. So far, that was sexual at all, but there might be later on. This was just where Izuku had chosen to start. He took my small toes. Was finally signed to him after a long moment, but Hound Dog could already tell that would be the end of the session. Izuku was too pale and sweating now. His breathing was somewhat even, with a bit of a tremble, but it wouldn't take a lot for it to get worse if they continued. Alright, how about we end this here? I want you to write in your journal about any dreams or thoughts or experiences. Good, bad, horrible, or bland. Write it all, it'll help you. Uri, can you make sure he does that? Yes, I can do that, she promised as Izuku gave him a weak smile. It was a start to the trauma and pain that the boy had suffered. It would just take time to parse it out. It was a start. FYW, you cannot seriously think that you can keep those notebooks. Hound Dog growled at the principal, eyes narrowed at the little weasel. They're a coping mechanism for him. As I've explained before, Aizawa growled right along with him. The two of them stood in front of the principal, both on the same page about those incredible notebooks that the teen had created. They give him something to ground himself with and to distract himself with when his thoughts have drifted off to undesirable thoughts. It'll help him in his healing and PTSD responses, especially since his first response is to grab a notebook and write it down. But he won't do that now. He met those beady black eyes head on as he continued, his hackles rising in his anger and his words muddling slightly with barks. He's too afraid of you, Bark, taking those tour. He shook his head as he tried to rein his instincts in. The information that's held within those notebooks are too dangerous to just leave laying around, Nanzu stated as he brought his cup of tea up to sip it. Like speaking about a student's mental health was just another passing hobby that he didn't have to worry about. An annoyance he didn't want to deal with in truth, but one the humans around him tried to force repeatedly. We cannot allow the information to get out if he gets careless with one. Except you'd have to be on your level of intelligence to even hope of deciphering them, Aizawa pointed out. They're beautifully coded and I had no way of cracking that code. He even admitted that the only two people that had known how to crack it were his mother and Bakugo, both of whom were or are incredibly close with him in the first place. I took a look at them as well. I spent weeks looking it over and I had him give me a simple sentence with several hints. I've still been unable to figure out what it says. Hound Dog held out the piece of paper to Aizawa to look over as he turned back towards the principal. Besides, the notebooks won't leave campus and they're just as safe in his dorm room, which is in the teacher's dorms. No one else can get to them easily if at all, let alone crack that code. No kidding. Even with these hints he gave you, I have no clue what he wrote. Aizawa put the paper down on the desk and Nedzu huffed. I'm in the dorms with him and Eri nearly all the time. And when I'm not, one of the others are there. Do not forget that there is a spy on campus. We still do not know who it is. Nedzu tilted his head before giving a great sigh. Though I do agree that they are safe on campus regardless of where on campus. Are you sure that this will benefit Midoriya's well-being? Absolutely. They give him an outlet to allow emotions he doesn't want or know how to deal with. Taking them away has taken away a comfort tool and a way for self-expression. Hound Dog explained calmly. Giving them back will give those things back. Not to mention his confidence in his notebook staying with him and in his care. The stoat was silent for a long moment before sighing and nodding his head. I'll return them within the next few days. No, I'll be taking them back now, Aizawa stated calmly as he glared down at the principal. You'll hand them over and I'll be returning them back as soon as we're done here. After that, you'll not even try and take them without his permission and reassurance that they'll be returned to him as soon as possible. If I hear otherwise, you will not like my response, Nenzu. The teacher gave a sharp grin. Or Midoriya and Ko's response, I'm sure. That got a twitch from the principal before he sighed again and nodded his head. When he jumped from his chair to retrieve the notebooks, Aizawa and Hound Dog shared a fist bump. FYW, so, have you done the homework I gave you last time we met? Hound Dog looked at the other for a long moment, waiting quietly. Trying to rush this one was never a good idea, and allowing him to come with his own thoughts at his own pace was always the best chance. Yeah, though I don't think Ishido would have allowed me to get away if I hadn't. Bakugo grumbled as he slumped onto the couch, arms crossed over his chest, and a scowl etched on his face. Goddamn wouldn't stop bugging me until I sat down and did it. So, what were some of the things you wrote down then? The question was about a simple homework project for the boy, a list of things he wanted to try and improve on. He could even ask for help with his friends to figure out where he was weak and needed improvement. A project that Hound Dog had given after the teen had come storming into his office, yelling about how it wasn't fair that he failed the provisional licensing exam because he wasn't nice to the proctors. TCH, Kirishima and Ashido both helped me with this, so don't fucking blame me if his shit sounds shitty. He grouched as he pulled out a notebook from his bag and opened it up. Between the three of us, we decided on 5 major shitty things I could fucking improve on. We thought about other shit, but these are the top fucking 5. The blonde looked up at Hound Dog with questioning eyes. 5 things are good. I'm proud of you guys wanting to focus on a few things instead of several. This'll be a good start, I'm sure, he assured as he waved his hands at the teen. Fuck, okay, so the first one is using names. I'm shitty at names to begin with, so I use a description to try and remember them. They're fucking simple, like raccoon eyes for Ashido or glasses for the Prees, Katsuki stated as he rubbed at his cheek in embarrassment. It was a failing on his part and one he need to work on. That'll take some work for sure. Some people are just naturally bad with names, but improving on it will help with your hero career. Names are important in this career, so yes, a good one. He nodded his head with a proud purr. The second shit is trying to be patient with people. Ashido already stated my damn temper is horrendous and that I can't fucking expect everyone to be on my level. Patience with the others will make it easier to work with them. At least, that's what she said. He shook his head, already knowing that this would be another one that would be difficult. We've already established that was something to work on. You've already made a few leaps in the right direction, so we'll keep working on that. I'm sure your friends will be more than happy to help with that as well. He gave a nod in approval. Katsuki huffed before looking back down at his notebook. Teamwork is something I suck ass at. I've known that for years. I fucking hate working with people. His mind jumped to Todoroki and Deku. Izuku right away. I always feel like I'm being put down like a shitty piece of gravel or something, which comes from the inferiority complex we've gone over. We'll keep working on that and I'll give you some exercises to work with to make it a little better when you have to do a teamwork exercise. I'll even talk to Aizawa about putting you with people that could help with that problem, which normally he wouldn't interfere with training, but this was important to help in Bakugo's improvement. Once he was more settled in that area, then he could back to randomizing the team-ups. The teen was silent for a moment before nodding. I think I'd like that. I hate admitting it, but some of the asses in class rub me wrong and I just want to blow them up. Good, thank you for telling me that. I'll have that talk with Aizawa then. The counselor nodded as he wrote a reminder to do just that. Alright, so what's the fourth one then? I need to work on communicating when I'm fucking tired or overwhelmed. I fucking hit Kirishima the other day because he wouldn't shut the fuck up. The shitty noise coming out of his fucking mouth was too much and I couldn't take it. He explained with a growl. I didn't know how to tell him to shut the hell up, so I smacked him one. Which isn't good. Yes, communicating when you don't want to speak or hear others speak will help in the long run. That's a good one. We can do some exercises and I can give you some to do with your friends when you have time. That's brave of you to admit to. He huffed in irritation, knowing that it wasn't really brave, just a basic social skill he lacked, like a lot of the other ones he was lacking. He wasn't sure if it was just because his middle school years were fraught with so much bullshit, or because his head was so far up his ass he forgot to learn them. Either way, he was missing a lot. That fucking last one is apologizing. I don't fucking understand what I need to apologize for a lot of the times. Mostly because I don't damn well realize when I'm in the wrong. So I need to learn how to spot when I am wrong and learn to apologize for the right thing I did wrong. Which was really important apparently. At least, that's what both Kirishima and Ashido thinks. I don't fucking know. He rubbed at his face. No, this is a good one. Like how you tried to apologize to Izuku before. You apologized for the wrong thing. You didn't understand what you did was wrong in a whole fundamental way and you apologized for the wrong thing. So you need to learn how to think, recognize, and say it properly. This is good. We can work on that together and with your friends. Hound Dog couldn't help but give a low approving growl. This is a good start. I'm proud of this list. The teen was far from being perfect, but so were most humans. So expecting him to be the best in only a few months was improbable. This was a start where Bakugo could learn where he was wrong and improve in those areas. It helped a lot that his friends were more than willing to call him out on his shit and point him in the right direction. Giving Bakugo a chance, while a horrible decision in most people's eyes, wasn't the worst one in the world. Now the boy had a chance to learn and grow, and hopefully, one day, he could realize when he was in the wrong and actually fix those mistakes. It was only if he was given the chance to do so, and he was. Bakugo owed Midoriya a lot, even if he didn't realize it just yet. Rise again, things were starting to look up. Izuku was spending more time in the dorms with Eri, both socializing with the one at class as the days passed and the cultural festival moved closer. The two had also begun to separate slightly, but only a little bit. Eri could now go into an adjourning room to do a task or activity without freaking out about Izuku not being there, and Izuku would be perfectly fine as long as he could hear her. The classroom was the hardest part for both of them as the teachers decided it was time to really start separating them, if only for just a little bit, reuniting the two at lunch and then at the end of the day. Eri spent her time during Izuku's classes with one of the teachers or Nezu, going over schoolwork and catching her up with all that she had missed. Izuku concentrated on working on his own assignments he had missed and making sure he got all current work done as well. After classes, they would head to the student dorms with his classmates, and there they would work on homework or just hang out with the other teens. They were all intent on working Eri through all Disney movies, Pixar, and cartoons that they could think of. The girls would also go over and teach the little girl all female things whenever they could, which included makeup, hairstyles, and fashion. Izuku was more than happy to let them do that as he lacked a sense of style, and he had very limited knowledge in hair. It also helped that the class had also come together to start on their cultural festival presentation, which was apparently a concert. Aizawa-sensei had thankfully excused Izuku from the concert with an understanding nod, relieving a heavy weight that Izuku hadn't known he had been carrying since hearing about the festival. Instead, he would be accompanying Eri and Mirio around the festival and showing the little girl all sorts of things. His class could handle the convert without him, he was sure of it, which they were working on now, in fact. Gyro, Tokoyami, Yamomo, Kaminari, and Bakugo are all in the common area with their instruments, practicing the song that the singer had created. Izuku was happy to see them improving the song continuously, especially after Gyro had come up to him asking for help with her notes and thoughts. Eri was working with Ashido to learn the dance moves that the others were practicing. She wasn't smiling just yet, but you could see the excitement in her eyes as she followed the steps that the pink hero student was laying down for her. Izuku was set off to the side with the stage crew as they went over ideas to make things sparkle even more. There was even a suggestion of using Aoyama as a disco ball, but there were concerns since the only other one besides Izuku himself that would be strong enough to pull him would be Sato. But with the minimization of intelligence with his intake of sugar worried them. How about we just not do it then? No offense, Sato, but we just don't want to have to worry about you dropping Aoyama by accident, Shiro explained with an easy smile. Nah, that's fine. I might have increased my sugar intake without affecting my intelligence, but even I'm a little hesitant with that idea. I wouldn't want to lose my grip or something. He agreed easily with a ruffle of his hair. How about you have Aoyama blow up a piece of ice to turn it into snow? Izuku suggested after tapping Kuta's shoulder to get his attention. Then you can have Todoroki and Kirishima run along ice roads over top to help create even more snow. That's not a bad idea, Kirishima said as he thought it over. I could use hardening to make the snow dust as Todoroki makes it snow on the other side. Hey Aoyama, I have a question for ya. He called over to where the blonde was practicing his dancing with the group. Oh, he called back as he made his way. Izuku could only smile as the group talked and conspired, trying to come up with a time to practice it all. Things were going well and he could tell that the concert would go off without a hitch. Break time, you guys, Ashido cried out, yelling out louder to the band that was still messing with several chords. Hey, music heads, take a break. Ashido gave a grin as the group stopped. Sato has cupcakes in the kitchen and there's water and juice there too, she explained to everyone. Cupcakes? Eri questioned before turning to Izuku with wide pleading eyes. Can I have one? She put a finger to her trembling lip, still so very terrified to ask for anything, but confident enough in Izuku to do so anyways. The green-haired teen looked at the clock, taking in the fact that it was just 4:20 and it would soon be dinner, but already knowing he couldn't say no. He turned back to her and nodded as he held up one finger. Eri gave a nod before rushing towards the kitchen to get a cupcake. Izuku looking back down where he held a notebook of all the ideas that the stage crew was having, sorting out the ones that could work and ones that wouldn't. The scream shattered the piece and sent Izuku flying over the couch into the kitchen. There he stared as little Eri screamed with tears running down her face, hands held against her chest as she cowered against the corner she had sequestered herself to. Izuku's head whipped around the room to try and figure out what had set the little girl off, only to catch sight of Tokoyami, Aoyama, and Ida quickly exiting the room, the class president and cheese connoisseur blocking Tokoyami from the little girl's view. Eri, it's okay. Ochako was speaking over the little girl's cries. Her, Mina, Tsu, and Yamomo were all crouched around the little girl, trying to get her to calm down. It was only Tokoyami. He's a big softie, I promise, Mina tried to reassure. He just looks a little scary because of his plumage. He's super nice and his quirk, Dark Shadow, is awesome too. Sue added on. Neither would hurt a fly. Come now, don't cry. Here, have a bunny. Yamomo coaxed as she pulled a green bunny from her stomach and held it out to the distressed child. Come on now, there's no need to cry. It was only Tokoyami. Why is she crying? Gyro groused as she covered her ears. Shoji had pulled in all of his extra ears and covered his main ones as well, but you could tell Gyro was the most affected. It's not like she hasn't seen him before. I think he snuck up on her by accident, Sato said as he rubbed the back of his neck. It gave her a shock. Doesn't mean she needs to be bawling like this, the singer stated as she turned to leave, only to shrink into herself as she came face to face with a furious-looking Bakugo. If you think that, then get the fuck out now, earlobes. He snarled at her before brushing by her and heading straight for the still crying little girl. Izuku startled at that and finally started to move forward too, unsure of what to expect from the blonde even as they moved closer towards each other. Back the fuck up now, he snarled at the girls, startling them as he came up behind them. What the hell, Bakugo? Ochako snarled back even as Mina, Tsu, and Yamomo moved away from Eri. We're trying to help her calm down. Not by crowding her, you ain't. He snapped back as he got between her and the girl, pushing forwards and making her back away. You don't need to be crowding someone who's having a fucking panic attack, asshole. Like you would know anything about that. The gravity girl shoved her face up into his face, neither backing down even as Eri continued to cry, and Izuku slowly and carefully moved over to the little girl. You've caused more panic attacks for other people, I bet. You're nothing more than a beast. That doesn't mean you fucking get in another person's face. He snapped back. And what the fuck would you know about any of that? You don't know nothing about me, you stupid bitch. Uraraka, you need to back off, Mina said as she put her hand on the girl's shoulder. You really don't know anything about Bakugo. She was hoping to defuse the situation, showing that she was on Bakugo's side but that she was more than willing to speak with Uraraka as well. I don't believe it, said girl stated, stamping her foot. Izuku could only shake his head as the two stood snarling at one another as he came to kneel in front of Eri. He carefully reached forward, with just a finger, and settled it against one of the girls instead. He waited until she opened her eyes to stare at him as she moved her fingers forward to wrap around the one. He gave her a smile as she started quieting her cries, hiccuping and using her free hand to rub at her eyes. Look, if we calm her down and then just bring Tokoyami back into the room, we can show her that he's not a bad guy, Uraraka said as she waved a hand around. I mean, if we're careful about it, it could work. Momo agreed as she had a finger against her chin and thought. We'd have to go really slowly and make sure Tokoyami looks as unthreatening as possible. If we have Midori help out too, maybe even get Mirio-senpai to come in as well, that could make it even better. Mina agreed with a small smile on her face. Izuku frowned at the girls and some of the guys that were agreeing with them. That wasn't how you were supposed to help with fears. You can't just force a victim to face their fear if they weren't ready. There was a reason why Izuku was almost always across the room away from Tokoyami when he and Eri were in the student dorms. He made sure that he never forced the little girl go anywhere near the other teen. Even Izuku flinched from his friend when he wasn't expecting him, all because of his beak. But forcing Eri to face that fear wasn't going to help. They were lucky her quirk didn't react this time. But if they tried to force this, then it was very likely someone was going to get hurt. Are you fucking morons? Izuku's head snapped up to Bakugo. Brows furrowed as he wondered what the teen would say. The fuck you trying to do? Scare the living shit out of her? We're trying to help her, Bakugo, something you know nothing about. Uraraka frowned as she crossed her arms. Facing a fear can help a person overcome them. I'm sure you know something as simple as that. I also know that forcing someone to face a fear could cause them to go into a shitty meltdown. Round cheeks. You don't force someone to do something just because you think it'll help. He sent a crimson look over to where Izuku was now standing with Eri standing behind him, keeping a grip on his finger. That could just make things fucking shittier than before. You can't force people to do whatever the fuck you want, even if you think it's for this own shitty good. But we won't know until we try. Uraraka just wasn't giving up, and part of it was probably because it was Bakugo standing against it. At least that's what Izuku thought. The girl had been nothing but full of hate towards Bakugo since she had found out how he treated her friend. Even during class it was starting to get irritating. Always fighting against the exact opposite of Bakugo just because. I think 𝗵𝗃 is right though. Kirishima spoke up as he went to stand with his friend. Mina moving over to stand with him too, while Momo stood next to Uraraka, Tsu, and Gyro still. Sato decided he wasn't going to join either side and stood away with Xiaoji. We can't force her to do something. That's exactly what Shai Hasekai did in the first place. But we're trying to help her in Tokoyami, Momo said as she looked towards the doorway where their bird-like classmate had disappeared. If she can't get over her fear, it'll just continue hurting Tokoyami too. Which isn't either of their faults. Mina frowned. I know it hurts him, but he also knows it's got nothing to do with him as a person. This was an accident and we can't blame either of them for it. She waved her hands in the air trying to clear the air out of the bad vibes she was feeling. We can't just let them hurt like this though. We have to do something to help them heal and recover from this, especially Eri, since she got hurt so bad. Uraraka continued with her cheeks going pink in frustration. She only wanted to help Eri feel better, to help Tokoyami feel better, and to make the class feel whole again. You can't fucking force it. Bakugo snarled as he glared at the girl. Oh, shut up, Bakugo. No one wants an abuser's opinion on something like this. She snapped right back. Watching Bakugo flinch back at that was the final straw for Izuku. He just couldn't allow this to continue even though he loved his friends. This was going too far. Shut up. He tried to yell, except coming out more gravely and low due to how long it had been since he had talked. Didn't seem to matter though because Gyro and Xiaoji instantly turning to him caught everyone else's attention. Nai-chan, Eri questioned as she looked up at the suddenly furious look on the other's face. Uraraka, He stopped and coughed as everyone turned to him, now completely quiet in the kitchen. I appreciate that you worry and care about me. He sent her a glare as his hands shook slightly with how angry he felt. But you do not get to treat Bakugo like that. That's rude and disrespectful. That's what he deserves though. She shot back with a shake of her head. He's a bully and an abuser. He's done nothing to prove that he isn't. Except he has. Mina stepped in with fists clenched tightly. He's been nothing but helpful when we ask for help on homework. He's been really supportive and gives great suggestions while we're working on our song. Gyro pointed out as well. Not to mention he's actually been constructive during our practice. Like that matters when all he does is yell and shout at the rest of us. He just called me round cheeks instead of my name. I've told him a million times what my name is. She shouts as she stood her ground. He's trying, Hiroshima shouted back, brows furrowed and fists clenched like everyone else in the room. You can't just ignore all the effort he's putting into getting better. It's not like someone can actually change who they are. Uraraka's face was full on red now. He'll always be an abuser and nothing is ever going to change that, especially after everything he's done to Deku. I'll never forgive him for that. That was when Bakugo actually stepped back and turned away, moving to walk away from the group and argument. Izuku could see sweat dripping from his clenched fists. And with how his head was bowed, the greenette was sure that the other was hiding hurt or anger on his face. Instead of confronting Uraraka, he was walking away. He was walking away when he was being slighted and put down. That was something that Izuku had never seen the blonde do before. He always screamed, yelled, threw punches, and set off explosions whenever he was insulted. He fought back and insulted back and didn't let anything slide. Because Bakugo was the best and he had to make sure everyone knew that. Walking away, even though he was angry or hurt, it just didn't happen. You don't get to make that decision. Izuku shouted the best he could. All attention back on him as he watched Bakugo leave the kitchen and into the living room. You aren't the one he hurt the most. You aren't the one who gets to decide what he can or can't do. You aren't the one who decides if he can change or not. That's not what I meant. His friend looked at him hurt, like he had slapped her. Sure, maybe calling you round cheeks hurt, but he's done nothing but show you respect otherwise. He's one of the few guys that actually takes you serious during class and doesn't hold back. So why are you saying he can't change? Why are you calling him an abuser when he has never actually hurt you? Because he hurt you. That's all the reasoning I need to hate him and make sure he never tries to hurt you again. She gave him a pleading look, hand reaching out towards him. Except you don't get to treat him like that. I don't like it and I don't agree with it. You know that. I've told you that and Todoroki, both. I've explained that to you. His throat was starting to hurt and he coughed a few times before continuing. You don't get to act like Bakugo just because of the way he treated me. Get over yourself. But he hurt you. She screamed right back, tears beginning to bead in the corner of her eyes. Yeah, me, not you. He could taste copper in the back of his throat but he ignored it. It was me he hurt, not you. You didn't get burned. You didn't get belittled. You didn't get beaten and ganged up on. It was never you. His voice began to give out and the taste of copper strengthened. You have no right. All right, okay, how about we get you a glass of water, Midoriya? Momo said as she stepped forward, holding her hands out between the two. You've got a little bit of blood there. She pointed at his lip. Izuku raised a hand and wiped said lip, looking at the little smear there. He shook his head as he turned and picked Eri up into his arms. I'm going to the teacher's dorms. I'm done here, he whispered out as he took off with the little girl, snatching a cupcake up as they passed them and handing it to her. Wait, Deku, I'm sorry. Uraraka followed the teen, trying to get him to stay and talk to her. Come on, let's just talk this out. I'm sorry I said that, but... She continued on, going as far as to follow him to the teacher's dorm. Izuku ignored her all the way to the teacher's dorms, hoping she would stop and leave him alone. But she followed him all the way. Thankfully, Aizawa-sensei was just about to enter the building when he stopped and watched the two with a raised brow. Izuku gave his sensei a look as he walked by him and into the building, Uraraka trying to follow but was stopped by their sensei. He didn't bother looking back or at the other teachers in the common room as he went up to his rooms. He needed time and all he wanted was to just be left alone with only Eri for company. Ra-sensei, please, I need to talk with Deku, she exclaimed as she tried to work around the pro, trying to get to her friend. I messed up and I need to make it right, except it doesn't look like he wants to talk right now, he stated as he kept his place in front of the door. You'd think him ignoring you all the way here would give you a hint, but really, Uraraka, do you not know how to respect someone's boundaries? He raised a brow at her embarrassed look. I also know you students had been questioning why Bakugo hadn't been moved into the teacher's dorms. Can you guess why now? The teen gave pouty look as she shook her head. But nothing. You kids don't understand when someone has had enough without them shouting in your face. Bakugo and state when he's had enough and will let you know. Not to mention that he's more than capable of ignoring those trying to make him do something he doesn't want to. Midoriya doesn't do that. Have you noticed that? He lets you all get into his space even when he's uncomfortable, and he'd never refuse you entry to his area. He nodded towards the door behind him. That's why I put him in the teacher's dorms. He can actually get away and get a break from you if he needs to. He gets space that he very dearly needs, even when you don't want to give it to him. Uraraka looked at the ground and dug her toe into the ground as she thought that over. I didn't mean to be rude, sensei. I know, but like I said, a lot of you kids don't understand boundaries. I put Midoriya in here to give him safe space and a chance to build those boundaries. You need to learn to start respecting them. He gave a sigh as he rubbed at his forehead. Look, go back to your dorm and think hard about how you want to keep your friend, because the behavior I saw could mean you very well could lose him if you aren't careful. With that, he turned and entered the building, leaving behind a very unsure student. You should just ignore her, Bakugo, Mina said as she tried to reassure her friend, shouting over the sound of his drums. She doesn't know you or the work you've put into getting better. The blonde huffed and shook his head before focusing again on the drums. It wasn't the first time someone had said something horrible about him, especially since he had started at UA, where it seemed like everything he did made him look like a villain. He still remembered he knew where they had accused him of possibly joining the League of Villains. Not even Aizawa's claim of him doing nothing of the sort stopped some of the students from whispering in the hallways. So many of them believed he was the traitor or a possible villain. It was irritating. And to have round cheeks, Uraraka say that nothing he did was going to make him better or change about him, that it hit pretty hard, especially since she could be right. There was a chance he wasn't changing, but was only just hiding who he really was. Was he really not changing? Was he just going to jump backwards and hurt anyone around him again? Make them all feel horrible and leave more scars on more people? Pink hands grabbed one of his wrists, stopping him from beating on the drums. He shot her a harsh glare, but the glare she was sending him told him that she wasn't letting him go anytime soon. In fact, her hands tightened on his wrists. "Listen to me, Katsuki," she stated, catching his full attention as she used his full name for the first time. He stared into her eyes for a long moment before giving a huff and lowering his other hand, giving her his full attention. She nodded as she released him and straightened up. "Look, I know it sucked when Uraraka said all of that stuff, but you can't take it to heart. She's just angry and doesn't think you got what you deserved," she explained calmly. "The fuck is it any business to her in the first place?" He gave a low growl, trying to turn the hurt into anger. He thought the two of them had built a type of respect between each other, but he should have known better the moment her and Icy Hot had attacked him that one day. She's friends with Midori, she cares about him a lot, and takes any slight to him personally. Kinda like how Kirishima and I are always fighting for you when you get insulted, she explained with a shrug of her shoulders. That doesn't give her the right to say any of those things. But that's the reasoning behind it. You just need to ignore it because none of it is true. But what if it is? He snarled as he stood up from his drums. What if I'm not changing? What if I'm just fucking acting like I'm changing and all I'm doing is damn well hiding it? The fuck am I going to do if I hurt a shitty extra again? For no shitty reason. He threw his hands in the air, fighting against the impulse to set explosions off as the sweat gathered in his palms from his agitation. That right there tells me you aren't," Mina exclaimed as she pointed at him. "That you're worried about going back to that person. That's what's going to stop you from going back to that person." "What the fuck does that mean?" he groused as he wiped his hands off with a special cloth that would neutralize the nitroglycerin. "It means that you don't want to go back to the person you were in middle school. You're scared of going back to that person cause you realize that that person was in the wrong," she explained excitedly as she began to bounce on her toes. "That means you don't want to hurt anyone anymore, not like that at least." He fell silent at that, unsure of what to think about that. He was hoping that it was true though, because that meant he was changing and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't always be a bully. That one day, he would actually deserve to be a hero student, and deserve to be a hero. But more importantly, maybe one day he would deserve Izuku's forgiveness. "Viva la vida yo, Bakubro, you have a phone call," Kirishima called out to his friend, holding said phone up so the blonde could see it. "You want me to answer it for you? Fuck if I care. I'm busy here, shitty hair," he snapped as he looked over the music sheets for the song Gyro had given him. They were trying really hard to get this song down. It didn't help that they only had a week before the concert was to take place. It was a pain in the ass to deal with, but he already knew how important it was to his classmates. So he was going to put his all into the concert regardless. "Oh, okay then," Kirishima said as he looked at the phone that said old hag before hitting the accept button. He was just going to explain that Bakugo was busy at the moment and would call them back. It wouldn't be good to talk now anyways, not with all the noise in the common room from the dance team and band practicing anyways. "Hell, fucking brat." He ripped the phone from his ear and stared at it in shock. "Pick up the phone sooner than that. I've been trying to get a hold of you for fucking hours, you shithead." "Ah, Kirishima." "Who is that?" Ochako questioned as she stared at him in worry and horror. Midoriya was standing right next to her with a resigned look on his face. Bakugo was glaring at the phone from his place in front of his drums while Ashido, Kaminari, and Siro all stared in confusion from where they were standing nearby as well. "Fucking brat. Answer me." Bakugo gave a huff of annoyance before walking forward, but stopped when another hand took the phone from the redhead with a put-upon look on his face. "Auntie Mitsuki, is that any way to talk to your nephew?" Midoriya questioned quietly. His voice was still rough, but at least he was still talking again. Yuri looked up at him from where she held onto his pants leg, wondering who he was talking to. "I see you, Kun. Ah, I didn't realize you answered the phone." The voice, though calmer, was still loud and everyone who stood near could hear them clearly. "How is school going for you?" Have you made other friends besides my shitty brat, Auntie Mitsuki? We're all trying to get ready for the festival coming up and Kaken is busy practicing. What is it that you needed? It was amusing to see the brunette control the conversation like it was nothing. None of them had ever seen him speak with someone so smoothly and easily. Ah, right. I called to let the brat know that I've been released from rehab and I'm back home again. I had to have Masaru throw out all the alcohol and whatnot, so if he wants to come and visit, he should, especially as we have a lot to talk about, she explained calmly, causing several of the others listening in to share concerned looks. Though if he's not ready to talk to his own mother, I can't say I blame him, not after all the advice I got from my therapist. Okay, well, I'll let him know then, though I wouldn't expect him home anytime soon. None of us really have a whole lot of time to go and visit our families until after the culture festival is over, Izuku explained as he turned away from the staring eyes of his classmates, only to huff as he came to face another group of them. Eri was looking up at him as well, and that just added more eyes he didn't really need. We're all putting in as much effort as possible to try and give a great performance. Kaken even took up his drumsticks. Ah, so all those drum lessons aren't going to waste. That's great news. You'll have to video it for me so I can see it. I already know that family isn't allowed to this year's festival and any possible buys for the support course are going to be heavily surveyed and searched. She sighed as if she was mourning a chance, which for her and Masaru as designers probably were. They had gone to the festival in the past to get designers to join their brand. They were missing out on possible designers to further their company and brand. Masaru and I aren't up for that this year, and though we'll miss your performance, we hope to see videos sent from you too, she stated with a firm tone. Now, tell that shitty brat of mine that we wish him luck and that we hope he'll visit soon. We have a lot to talk about and a lot I need to apologize for. Of course, Auntie, I'll let him know. Make sure to give Mom a call when you get a chance too. I'm sure she's missing her friend, he assured before the two exchanged goodbyes and hung up. I forget how hard she can be to talk to, he muttered as he set the phone back down on the countertop where it had originally been. Make sure to call her when you get a chance, Bakugo. I don't want to have to do that again anytime soon. Not like I fucking asked you to, you shit nerd. The blonde snarled as he gripped tightly to his drumsticks, his lips thinning as he tried to control himself. He had better things to do than talking with the old hack. Fuck off, he grunted as he turned back to the drums and began practicing the song once more. His part was packed with hard hits and he had to make sure the other instruments shined even when he played. He couldn't overplay it or he'd be blocking out the others. Geez, no wonder Bakugo is so loud, Uraraka said with a shake of her head, even as she kept her eyes focused on the blonde, her brows furrowing as she thought. Has she always been like that, Deku? She turned away from the blonde and looked at the brunette, loud and overbearing. Yeah, always. I guess she was like that in school too. At least that's what my mom has always said. He shrugged at her as he looked down fully at Eri, who was holding two chopsticks and was mimicking Bakugo's movements as she kept her red eyes on him. He smiled at her before turning back to Ochako. She and Bakugo's mom have known each other since high school, best friends for years. Oh, well, okay then. She gave a nod before turning back towards where Ashido was gathering the dancers again to practice. Izuku watched her with a frown and furrowed brows, already having a feeling that something was going to happen that he wasn't going to like. He wasn't sure what it was going to take to get it through Uraraka's head that she had no real business in trying to help him with Bakugo and his behaviors, but he knew it was going to have to be something extreme. Maybe it was time to get Aizawa-sensei and the other teachers involved in this, before it completely blew their class into section. Bakugo sighed as he leaned against the counter, cup of water in one hand and the other in his pocket. They'd just finished another practice session and the cultural festival was getting closer every day, causing stress among all of Class 1A. Even Deku, who was just helping here and there, was feeling the heat. He was hoping that when they pulled this off and kicked ass at the concert, that they would all relax and let some of the stress go. Hopefully this would allow his classmates some sort of a break sometime soon. They needed it, and if he was truthful only to himself, then so did he. He growled as his phone rang, chiming off a rock song he enjoyed and one he kept for only one person. What's up, old man? He grunted out as he answered the phone and then took a drink of his water. Not a whole lot at the moment, Masaru Bakugo answered with his normal calm tone. Bakugo could hear the smile in his voice though, and he knew his old man was actually happy at the moment. I just wanted to check on you and to let you know that you can block your mother if you want. That made the teen blink in surprise, not expecting that. What the fuck? Weren't you the one that was all gung-ho for us to make some goddamn reunification bullshit? He sipped at his water as he waited for his dad's answer. A sigh came and that told Bakugo a lot more than his old man probably wanted. I know I want our family to get along and be able to cohabitate again. But I've talked with your mother's AA sponsor and your therapist. Oh, that would explain some of this, especially since Masaru was the one that actually listened to the doctors more often than not. They suggested that we just keep you two separated for a while. I know that your mother wasn't always the best and she never truly harmed you, but some bruises and cuts could have been avoided if I had just stood up and separated you two. Fuck that. He grunted as he settled the glass on the counter with a slam. Like a big-ass softy like yourself could have fucking stopped either of us. He gave a sigh as he ran a hand through his hair. You fucking did what you could, but there's shitty situations you couldn't stop. We're fucking moving on and getting better. Maybe now it's time for you to start taking care of your own shit. Which was true. His dad was the main front of the designer company the two ran, mostly because he was the more calm and level-headed one. His mom had a mind for business, but she tended to run them off because of how wild she could be, so his dad headed the front and then talked with their mother about their next moves. That way they kept business coming and his mom was still kept in the loop. But because of that meant that Mitsuki was home a lot more often than Masaru and so had the most interaction with Katsuki. His mom was always a drinker and she always had a temper. The two combined meant trouble. Katsuki knew this and so avoided his mother whenever she was drunk or angry or even both. That didn't mean he didn't hold his fucking ground when it came down to it. He was just as much Mitsuki's child as Masaru's, more so on some of the worst days, and so he threw his own anger at her. He had never harmed her or did anything permanent, but he made sure she suffered almost as much as he did at the end of the day. She had neon green hair for a month before she was able to get it all out. That didn't mean having to duck underneath a beer or wine bottle once in a while wasn't annoying, or having to lie about a bruise here and there wasn't a pain. It just meant that it all evened out in the end. Even so, I should have stood up for you more often. I am sorry, Katsuki. That wasn't a better man, a better father for you. Masaru continued, and now it was really starting to fucking annoy him. She didn't do anything that I couldn't fucking handle. The old hag only ever put her hands on me when we pissed each other off, and I made sure to get my fucking revenge anyways. He huffed before shaking his head. Either way, that doesn't fucking matter. Are you sure that you don't mind me blocking the old hag? I can just keep ignoring her like the shitty-ass son I am. You aren't a bad son, Katsuki. And yes, I think it would be best if you blocked her for now. I'll explain it to her and make sure she listens. Besides, you deserve to grow and heal too. Just because you don't think it didn't affect you, doesn't mean it didn't leave its marks on you. The man was too calm and logical. It always pissed the teen off, but he grunted anyways. He wasn't about to push his old man away. Not after all the shit he had put up with concerning Katsuki. So block your mother and ignore any and all contact with her until you feel up to it. Yeah, okay, I can do that. He agreed with an exhale that wasn't relieved. It didn't matter who you asked. He'd deny that to the end of his days. Did you want me to tell you about the shitty concert or maybe some of the designers I've seen? Yes, that would be great, son. Katsuki could only return the smile that he could hear in his dad's voice, finally feeling somewhat calm and relaxed for the first time in months. 𝗵𝗃, look, I don't know what she's going to do, but your Araka has gone more than far enough, Izuku said as he talked with his homeroom teacher. She's my friend, but she doesn't have the right to treat Bakugo the way that she is. I agree, which stunned Izuku a little bit, though honestly, he shouldn't have been. Aizawa was completely different from all of the other teachers he had ever had. He listened and took his worries seriously, and he helped him however he could. This man was someone he could trust, but it was still something he was having a hard time believing. Though there isn't much I can do until she actually oversteps her bounds. I'll see about getting Hound Dog to talk to her, but that's all I can really do. Izuku frowned but nodded his head in understanding. He was really hoping that they could get this figured out before something major happened. He really didn't want his class to become divided, but he knew that if it came down to it, it might actually happen. What am I supposed to do now, though? He looked over to where he was drawing at the coffee table in the teacher's dorms. I'm really worried something is going to happen. A hand squeezed his shoulder, making him jump slightly and stare at his teacher with wide eyes. Aizawa held firm as he looked at his student. There's not much you can do but to remind her to mind herself. Your Araka is your friend, but that doesn't mean she gets to make your decisions or to tell you what to do, so hold firm. Make sure you've made your boundaries clear and remind her when she oversteps. If she keeps it up, then come find me or one of the teachers. We'll help. The brunette sighed but nodded his head in agreement. All right, I can do that. Good. Now, go get some hot chocolate for your Inuri and try and relax. You've had a long day and you still have a long week before the festival is supposed to happen. The teacher smirked down at him. You might not be participating, but you'll still be walking around and enjoying the other class booths, so be ready for that. Yes, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku agreed with a small smile. Do you want a coffee while I make the hot chocolate? You know it. 𝗵𝗃, to be fair, your Araka has dealt with bullies in the past. Her school years was always filled with jerks thinking they can pick on those weaker than them, and she had to step in more and more as they happen. She hated it too, being mean to someone so unnecessarily and actually enjoying it. It was nothing more than what monsters would do. But that wasn't why she was so gung-ho on fighting against bullies. No, that wasn't what started it all for her. No, it had been her uncle. 𝗬𝗧𝗪 was her father's younger brother. 𝗬𝗧𝗪 had inherited a quirk similar to her father's, making things heavy, but to organic and inorganic objects is where his differed. He made sure to use that difference whenever he came to visit her family. Uraraka's family wasn't rich, not by a long shot, but they were comfortable for a long time and could make ends meet without too much trouble. 𝗬𝗧𝗪 would visit once in a while, and they would all laugh and enjoy their time together. They'd have a good dinner, and then 𝗬𝗧𝗪 would leave to go back to his own home. Then he had an accident at work. He was a part of the construction business with her parents, and something had gone wrong during the job. 𝗬𝗧𝗪 had been trapped under a crumbling building. 𝗬𝗧𝗪 broke a vertebrae in his back, his right arm in 3 places, a skull fracture, and more internal bleeding than they could count. It was lucky that he had survived being underneath the building, let alone the collapse on top of him. Her mom and dad had done everything they could to make sure he survived, and he had all the help in his recovery. It put them in debt. But 𝗬𝗧𝗪 came to live with them because he had no one else to take care of him. Mom's parents were passed, and dad's dad was in a nursing home with dementia. His mom had passed years before. It was only them or a rehab facility that none of them could afford anyways. While he lived with them, 𝗬𝗬𝗪 had changed. He became secluded and depressed and was always asking when his next dose of pain medication was. He barely got out of bed except to go to physical therapy or to use the bathroom. He was no longer fun to play with. In fact, Uraraka tried to avoid him entirely, especially after he started using his quirk on them. When he was annoyed, he'd slam them into the floor. When he was angry, they wouldn't even realize he'd used his quirk until they were kissing the floor. When he just wanted to be left alone. Uraraka had gotten a bloody nose more than once because of that. Her mother had gotten a broken leg because he'd used his quirk when they were on the stairs. Her father had a lung puncture when 𝗬𝗧𝗪𝗪 used his quirk at the wrong moment, and her father had slammed into the ground at an odd angle, breaking his ribs and piercing his lung. Her parents always made up excuses for him, saying he was hurting, that he was in pain, that he was depressed. What happened was traumatic, and it wasn't going to be easy for him to heal from it, and they had to give him time and support. Uraraka was at that age when schools were teaching them about abuse of quirks, physical abuse, emotional abuse, drug abuse, and so many more. So she knew that what he was doing was wrong, and her parents weren't doing anything to stop it. It's also how she woke her quirk up as well. 𝗬𝗬𝗪 had reached out to touch her, to use his quirk, to slam her into the ground, but she stood at the top of the stairs of their house. There wasn't a way for her to survive that if he managed to touch and activate his quirk. She reached for him to grab him, and instead of his quirk activating, hers did. He floated up to the ceiling in a panic, screaming the entire time. She only stared up at him with awe as she held her hands out to where he once stood. He stayed up there for a solid 30 minutes because her parents had gone for a consultation, and when they got home, they had cheered for her quirk, but 𝗬𝗧𝗪𝗪 stayed. She put up with his abuse for a couple of years before he finally died from an overdose on drugs and alcohol. The pain never left, and he just couldn't handle it anymore. She didn't cry over him once, so she knew that abusers never changed, only got worse, and they had to stand their ground. They couldn't let them control them and hurt them, and so Uraraka made sure that's what they did. Even if Deku didn't understand or see what the situation was like her parents never saw, she'd have to make sure that Bakugo knew that he couldn't get away with what he always did, and that she would fight him if he even tried to lay a finger on her friend. Because abusers never changed, they just continued on until they died. That was just how things worked in the end. After hearing the conversation between Deku and Bakugo's mother, she knew that he wasn't going to change. Not with history like that, and she was going to make sure that he wasn't going to get petty by using his past to further himself. That wasn't how this was going to go. She'd make sure of it. Uraraka, we need to talk. She smiled happily as she turned to look at her friend. They had just finished with dance rehearsal, so this was the best time to talk with Deku. But of course, Deku, I have a lot to apologize for, she assured even as she steered them far away from Bakugo. Todoroki suffered under his father his entire life. He remembered very little of his eldest brother 𝗬𝗪, only that he died because of the pressure Endeavor had placed on him. That pressure was now on his shoulders, and he would either survive or die like his brother. He couldn't do that to his mother and other siblings. They had already lost one family member, and he couldn't be another. Due to that decision, though, he suffered greatly under his father. Endeavor beat him every day in the name of training. He was homeschooled until UA, only allowed out in public for social events where connections could be made. His schooling was as extensive as it could be, and his training took up the rest of his time. He hated his father a great deal for it, so much so that he stopped using his flames until he met Midoriya. Once Midoriya came into his life, and he began to learn what real life could be like, what having friends was like, and reconnecting with the rest of his family away from Endeavor, he realized what he had truly been suffering. Abuse so extensive and so intent on just him that he was short on several things. At least that's what Hound Dog had said when he had finally gone to the man to speak about his social inadequacies. That experience with his father, though, it had allowed him the ability to notice when others were suffering something similar to himself. Bakugo was one he had tagged early on, mostly because the other hated being touched and the screaming was similar to Natsu. He obviously was going through something that he wasn't telling anyone. Uraraka with her subtle flinches whenever someone pinned her face down. It could be taken as something caused from pain, but Todoroki knew how soft the mats were and so knew it was the cause of something else, especially when she just about panicked whenever she was held down too long. 𝐲𝐠 refused to take his mask off, and then he also made sure to change in an area with curtains. Todoroki knew about mutation discrimination, so he figured the biggest but most common of them had most likely suffered some sort of abuse, even if it was from society instead of an individual. Honestly, most of his classmates showed signs of discrimination, abuse, neglect, bullying, or some other form of harm, but none more than Midoriya Izuku himself. No self-preservation, a high pain tolerance, flinching whenever someone came too close to him or moved too suddenly, and the pure panic in his eyes whenever explosions ripped through the area, especially if it was an explosion made by Bakugo. Midoriya was still so kind and gentle despite the abuse he went through, going so far as breaking his fingers and arm to help Todoroki himself. So he wanted to make sure that abuse never occurred for his friend ever again, especially when he found out that it was Bakugo that had caused a good chunk of the pain. He lost his cool and went for Bakugo's throat, especially as the blonde knew the pain of abuse but still gave it out. He hurt another like he was hurt and he just couldn't understand how or why, so he leapt at the chance to cause him pain. He took a lot of shots at Bakugo, whether the other was in his presence or not. He made sure his displeasure was known for a long time, up until Midoriya punched him in the face. He'd badmouthed Bakugo in front of his friend and had gotten sucker punched. The look the other teen had given him had told him more than enough. He didn't want to be anything like his father, and apparently he came pretty close to that line. Was standing tiptoe on it in fact. So he stopped and instead ignored the blonde and tried to just be there for Midoriya and Eri as much as possible. He feels that he's made the right decision, especially after hearing the conversation that Bakugo had in the kitchen. He could only guess that it was his dad, but it sounded like Bakugo was trying to be better than what his mother was. That was something that Todoroki could understand, and it was something that Todoroki could appreciate. All he could do now was make sure he wasn't anything like his father and leave Bakugo to not be anything like his mother. Hopefully they both succeeded. I don't understand why you keep protecting him, he heard as he headed back towards his room. Rehearsal had ended and he was ready to sleep, but apparently Uraraka wasn't. I'm not protecting him. That was Midoriya, which meant they were probably fighting at the moment. The two differing opinions were of Bakugo were always clashing recently, and Todoroki couldn't understand why the girl just couldn't let it go. Midoriya knew what he was doing, and he had even more help if he felt he didn't. But you aren't making things better by attacking him all the time. I'm not attacking him. I'm just making sure he's not attacking anyone else. He's a bully, she stated fiercely, and Todoroki could see her cross her arms over her chest as he turned the corner to the alcove just where the elevators were. He couldn't understand how they thought this was a great spot for a conversation when their classmates were going to head this way to use said elevators and the stairs. He needs to be kept away from you and kept in his place. I don't know what qualifications you have to say what his place is. That was the iciest tone that Todoroki had ever heard from his friend, and it sent chills down his spine. He was happy that Eri was being occupied by Momo and Gyro at the moment. The poor girl didn't need to see her savior like this. Not to be rude, but I agree with Midoriya, Todoroki stated as he walked over to the two fully. You don't have that right, neither do I, nor Midoriya. That's the teacher's duties, and from what I've seen, they're doing just fine. He gave a shrug at her betrayed look. Look, all I'm saying is lay off of him. You don't need to be acting like a bully just because he was, Midoriya said tiredly, running a hand over his face. I'm not a bully, she exclaimed as her entire face turned red and she glared at him. I'm nothing like that monster. I will never be anything like that ever. She slammed her foot on the floor before turning and running for the stairs, tears falling down her face. What was that about? Todoroki questioned as he turned and looked at his friend. He only got a shrug in return. Vivi, he was so tired. He had been working with the band for days and he was ready for bed now, especially since he had stayed up 2 hours later for this shit. His entire fucking schedule was off and it was screwing with his entire training regime. Motherfucker, he muttered as he rubbed at his neck, stepping off of the elevator to head to his room, only to stop when he noticed a figure standing in front of his room with red cheeks and fists clenched at her sides. Her eyes were narrowed in a vicious glare and he could tell she was here to fight. Bakugo, she growled lowly as her fists tightened even more. Cheeks, he grunted as he walked forward so he could stand in front of her, hands in his pockets and posture relaxed. He wasn't going to fight her and get in trouble that he didn't need to be in. What the fuck do you want? You to leave, she stated angrily. The hero course doesn't need an abuser in it, and destroying heroes' reputations even more. I don't see how I'm an abuser though, he stated with a raised brow. I've not hurt anyone outside of the hero course, and the one fight I was in, he leant forward in her face with a smirk. Deku fought back. He beat the shit out of me just like I beat the shit out of him. 𝗵𝘃𝗄. No, she snarled as she pushed him away. He allowed himself to be, that way he could gain space once more. He didn't want to fight, which meant he shouldn't provoke her any more than that. Deku is a better person than you'll ever be. You hurt him growing up and you caused him pain. That's bullying and abuse. You shouldn't be a hero because of that. You're right. He shrugged at her stunned look. I bullied him growing up and I hurt him. I called him names and put him down and made him feel like shit. But I can tell you what I never did. He cracked his neck before he gave her a bored look. I never once treated him like he was a child. That made the girl rear back in surprise and confusion. What are you talking about? I've never treated him like a child, she stated as she crossed her arms. All I've ever done is try and protect him from the monster you are. Except that's treating him like he's incapable. I've told that nerd on more than one occasion that he's useless, unable to do anything, and that he'd never be a hero. Sure, you can call me a monster or bully for that, you'd be right. He shook his head in irritation. I've even fucking told him to throw himself off the roof of our shitty school once. The fuck is wrong with you? She all but screamed at him in disbelief and horror. Her own uncle had spat abuse at her in a similar vein, and she could only ever imagine true monsters doing something like that. I wasn't in the best fucking state of mind. But I also never treated Deku like he couldn't make his own fucking decisions. I tried to get him to change shitty choices and decisions. But he never goddamn listened. That's just how Deku was, doing whatever the fuck he wanted despite being told to stop being a dumbass. He took a deep breath before he looked at her. I don't know why you fucking think you can make choices for him or try and protect him from something he's already dealt with, but you really are fucking stepping out of your bounds. Shut up. What would you know about any of that? What? Are you going to use your mother as an excuse for your behavior? Well, that doesn't matter. Just because her mother abused you doesn't mean you get to treat other people the same way. She snarled as she stormed up into his space and face. That's not an excuse to be shitty ever. Grow the fuck up and leave Deku alone. Who the fuck needs to grow up? He snapped as he shoved her away and then marched forward into her face, making her step back up in a hurry. You need to fucking grow up, you stupid bitch. I never once ever brought my shitty old hag into this. I fucking told no one about her for a shitty reason. What's between me and that bitch is between us. It's none of your fucking business. He snarled, ignoring the spit that landed on her face. He was so pissed. Just like I don't have a fucking right to use her as an excuse, you don't fucking get the damn right to use it against me. You want a fucking monster to fight and rally against. Well, you stupid cunt, go look in the mirror. He turned sharply and walked back over to his door, having forced her to walk backwards away from it earlier, and entered his room. He made sure to slam the door hard behind him. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 could only stand there and stare at where Bakugo had been, breathing heavily as her fury boiled in